Is she there? Yes, young master. Just step through the gate and it will take you to your destination. All right. Arthur found himself standing in the teleportation gate chamber. Some time had passed since the gathering of the nobility, and at last his request had been granted. Before him stood a stone platform where a faint azure light shimmered across intricate runic engravings. The symbols pulsed softly, steady as a heartbeat. He took a slow breath and stepped forward, realizing the meeting he had long awaited had come sooner than he expected. "Do not be afraid, young master," said the attendant, a man dressed in white mage robes. "The gate is keyed to your bloodline. It will recognize you and allow your passage. It is restricted to my bloodline." Arthur stopped himself and asked. "Indeed. Only those of the direct Valyrian bloodline may step through. I see." It appeared the gate had been designed to restrict entry to his father and brothers, though he doubted his brothers would ever be permitted to use it. His mother was a subject few dared to mention. The ladies of the court despised her, viewing her as a woman of low birth, and her being a moon elf only deepened their disdain. "My mother often said that as long as I hold her in my heart, we will never truly be apart." Arthur was aware that his presence here was an unprecedented event. He was supposed to vanish in Albrook, forgotten while one of his brothers ascended to the seat of Duke after years of struggle. Although his moon elf blood had granted him a longer life, he was uncertain whether he would ever see his mother again. She was held captive by his father, and if someone like Theodore were to claim victory, Arthur doubted she would survive. "I'll have to thank my friend for making this possible." The runes glowed brighter, swirling into shifting patterns as the azure gateway took shape. With a faint smile, he stepped forward and passed through the teleportation gate. His vision blurred, and for a brief moment he felt weightless, then the sensation vanished as he emerged on the other side. He found himself standing on a stone terrace overlooking a peaceful forest clearing. The scent of pine and blooming moon lilies drifted through the air. A soft mist floated over a circular lake whose still waters reflected the sunlight like polished glass. In the distance, nestled among tall trees, stood a modest villa built of pale stone and wrapped in green ivy. It lacked the grandeur of a palace but radiated warmth and quiet life. Birds sang from the branches and behind the villa lay a small garden filled with herbs, flowers, and vegetables. A few elves worked there, trimming the hedges and tending the soil. One of them noticed Arthur's arrival and froze in surprise, for visitors were rare in this place. "The illusion has improved since the last time." Arthur remained still as the servants hurried to greet him. He did not mind. Those who tended to his mother were few in number. Everyone living here was a woman, either a maid or a fellow moon elf. They were trapped in this place along with her, unable to leave, yet their loyalty to his mother remained unwavering. Her true identity was a secret known only to a select few. This place where his mother lived looked like a summer villa surrounded by forest and a lake, but it was nothing more than an illusion. The sky was artificial, and a mage using a flotation spell could easily reach its boundary. Although the area stretched several kilometers in circumference, it was a confined space that no one could leave. If he walked in a straight line, he would eventually reach a barrier that could not be crossed. A beautiful, tranquil birdcage, but still a cage is a cage. That was what it was to him, a prison for his mother, created by his father. It was a cage he longed to free her from, and for that, he needed to become stronger. In the past, he had abandoned the idea of ever becoming Duke, but after this incident, he began to see it as a real possibility. Even if he failed to claim the title himself, there were other paths he could take. Ivan, one of those who despised him, was already out of the race, leaving Theodore as the main obstacle. If he could at least stop Theodore from winning and instead help his older brother Julius claim victory, that could be enough. Still, he nurtured a faint hope. In the past, he had thought his brothers were beyond his reach and that their strength was incomparable. Now, after everything that had happened and after seeing them in action, he was no longer certain. He was a Tier 3 class holder, just like them, and he believed his knights were superior to theirs. This is no time to think about such things. Arthur's mind began to fill with doubt and thoughts of noble intrigue, but this was not the time for such things. This should have been a joyous occasion, a long-awaited reunion with his mother, whom he had not seen since leaving Isgard for Albrook. At last, his heartbeat slowed, and he stepped onto the moss-covered stones that led away from the teleportation gate. The gate stood some distance from the villa, giving him a moment to take in the view and to chuckle at the sight of the servants hurrying toward him. "Art, young lord, is that really you?" One of the servants reached him first. She was an older elf woman, far older than most, and someone Arthur remembered well from his past. Like everyone gathered here, she had long been part of his mother's entourage. To him, these women were not mere servants but people he cherished more than the entire Valyrian household combined. "It's me. How have you been, Silmaril?" And no need for that tone, I'm still just little Arthur. His appearance had changed since the day he left. He now looked more like a noble, with an air of refinement that matched his spotless attire. His old maids seemed to see him less as the boy they had helped raise and more as a member of the Valyrian household he had once stood apart from. Silmaril blinked, her silvery eyes shimmering with disbelief before a gentle smile curved her lips. For a moment, she simply stood there, taking him in. His polished attire, the way he carried himself, and even his posture all spoke of maturity. "Just little Arthur, I'm not sure that's true anymore. The last time I saw you, you were only a child, but now you look like a man, a proper noble lord." Her eyes grew misty as she spoke, and soon 2 more women joined her. They were slightly younger in appearance, though still well over 100 years old. "Welcome back, young master," they said in unison, bowing deeply. Their clothing was much like that of the maids who served in the main palace. "What did I say?" Arthur muttered, frowning as he looked at the 3 women. Silmaril and her helpers had raised him and stood by his mother's side for years. To him, they were already family. If he ever gained the power to free his mother, he would bring them all with him. He knew some of them longed to return to their homeland but could not, and he silently vowed to grant them that freedom one day. "My apologies, it has been so long, I just had to, know our young Arthur." A smile crept on the headmaid Silmaril's mouth as she finally spoke to Arthur more casually. Arthur chuckled softly at her words, relief easing the tension in his chest. "That's more like it," he said, smiling. "I was beginning to think you'd forgotten how to tease me." Silmaril gave a short laugh, brushing a strand of silver hair behind her ear. "Forgotten? Not a chance. You may look like a fine noble now, but I can still see the boy who used to sneak extra pastries from the kitchen." Her tone was warm and teasing, and for the first time since stepping through the gate, Arthur felt some of the weight lift from his shoulders. The younger maids behind her giggled quietly, their eyes bright with nostalgia. "Come," Silmaril said, gesturing toward the villa. "Let us take you through. I'm sure you remember most of it, though some things have changed since your last visit." Arthur nodded and followed her along the stone path lined with moon lilies that swayed gently in the faint breeze. The air was clean and pure, carefully crafted to bring tranquility. It was a pleasant place to stay, yet after years in the same surroundings, even this beauty would fade. As they walked, Silmaril spoke of small things, pointing toward the villa's garden and the shimmering trees beyond. The lady insisted on growing the white bell herbs again. She said with a quiet laugh. "They require a lot of sunlight," but she said she liked the sound of their chimes when the wind brushed past them. "We had to convince the mages to add a soft breeze to this place. You should have heard them complain." Silmaril continued to point out small details. She showed him the garden his mother had expanded, the new glass house where she cultivated rare herbs, and the small shrine by the lake that the maids kept immaculate. "Your mother spends most mornings tending the garden. She says it helps her forget." Her voice softened at the end, and she glanced at Arthur. "She misses you terribly, you know." He wasn't sure how to reply, but eventually nodded. "I've missed her, too. More than I can say." "I know," Silmaril said gently. "She never doubted you would come back. Every full moon, she sits by the lake whispering your name as if it could reach you through the water." Arthur quickened his pace as the maid continued speaking about his mother. The more she was mentioned, the stronger his longing grew to see her and take her away from this quiet prison. Silmaril led him down the final path of white stones bordered by pale blue flowers that glowed whenever touched by moonlight. The sound of the lake grew clearer, and the chirp of unseen birds became louder. Arthur's steps slowed as the trees parted, revealing the lakeside clearing. There, on a wooden bench by the water's edge, sat his mother. She looked as he remembered her, tall, graceful, her silver hair tied loosely behind her back and flowing like moonlight in the breeze. A basket of threads and cloth rested at her side, and her fingers moved delicately, stitching a pattern into white fabric. For a moment, she seemed at peace, the very image of serenity. But then Arthur noticed something as a strip of black silk was tied across her eyes. His chest tightened as he realized something was terribly wrong. Silmaril stopped a few steps behind him, her expression filled with sorrow. "She Lady Ilaria wanted to be the one to tell you. She said softly. Please, be thoughtful and don't let your emotions cloud your judgment. Arthur nodded, though the words barely reached him. He stepped forward, his boots sinking slightly into the soft grass. Mother. The word left his throat weakly, and as it did, his mother stopped. Her hands froze mid-motion, the needle suspended in place. Then, slowly, her lips curved into a faint smile. Is that my little Arthur? She said, her voice just as he remembered, soft, caring, and peaceful. Yes, it's me. So it truly is you. I wondered if the great moon would answer my prayers. Arthur hurried forward and knelt before her. Mother, it's me. I've come back. Her hand reached out, trembling slightly as it searched the air. He caught it gently and pressed it to his cheek. She laughed softly, just as she always had. Her face still carried that bright smile he had cherished since childhood. I can feel it. You've grown. My little Arthur has finally become a man. She spoke as her hands moved across his face and shoulders. He had grown stronger since he left, his body reshaped by the Tier 3 transformation. It was something he had been proud of, something he had wanted to share with her, but now all he could think about was her condition. Mother, your eyes, what happened? Her smile faltered for a moment. Ah! She breathed, turning her face slightly away. So you've noticed? Arthur clenched his jaw, anger burning behind his eyes. Who did this? It was no one worth your hatred. She replied quickly. A small act of cruelty, born of jealousy and fear. Do not waste your heart on vengeance, my son. My eyes do not matter. My spirit will not be shaken as long as you are here, my precious boy. But why didn't His Grace protect you? He made a promise. He wanted to cry out, to demand the truth, but before he could, she pressed a gentle finger to his lips. Don't blame your father, it's not his fault, he did his best to protect me and you. She replied and kept smiling. As in the past, his mother defended Duke Alexander. He had never understood why she was so lenient with him, but she always said that the Duke was protecting them in his own way. He just needed more time to mature and understand. It doesn't matter. Now help your mother up. We must prepare a feast. My son has returned. If I had known you would come today, I would have waited to begin this stitch. Now I will have to start again. When she mentioned the embroidery, Arthur looked at the fabric she had been working on. Even without her sight, her hands had not lost their abilities. The image on the cloth was of him. Not as he was now, but as the boy she remembered. A much younger version of him, one that saw the world in brighter light. Arthur helped her to her feet, the light from the lake catching the silver threads in her hair. He tried to hide his trembling hands as he steadied her. Her touch was as gentle as ever. Warm, comforting, and filled with that unshakable grace that defied her circumstances. Come, mother. He said softly. You shouldn't overexert yourself. Overexert? She laughed. I have sat in the same place for too long. A walk with my son is hardly work. It is a blessing, and my legs work just fine. She gently tugged at one of Arthur's cheeks, then moved her hand around his and pressed her face against his arm with a quiet sigh of relief. I've missed you. Now tell me, what have you been doing all these years? If you're here, then something must have happened. I've read all of your letters, but you never mentioned any of this. Were you trying to surprise your old mother? It seemed that his mother and the maids were unaware of the attack that had taken place at the palace. This was not surprising, since their only contact with the outside world came when supplies arrived once a week. His mother was not permitted to leave, and the maids shared the same restriction. Occasionally, she received a newspaper and some gossip from the other servants, but that was all. Surprised? No, I can't say I expected this to happen. I don't even know where to begin. So much has happened. We have time. Tell me slowly, perhaps over some tea. Silmara. Of course, my lady. Silmara bowed her head and turned toward the villa, the other maids hurrying after her. The faint sound of footsteps and rustling skirts faded as Arthur and his mother began to walk slowly. The plants chimed softly in the distance while Arthur began to tell his story. Well, after I left the city, I arrived in Albrook with Mary and 2 loyal knights. At that time, I thought I was finished and would never return here, but then I met someone quite peculiar. Oh? That sounds interesting. Who was it? Did you perhaps get married? Am married? No, nothing like that, mother. His mother brightened at the mention of the person who had changed his fate, yet she seemed a little disappointed when she realized he had not married. It was clear that she longed for grandchildren, but he was not ready for that step. This person is more of a friend. His name is Wayland. The loss of her eyesight still lingered in his thoughts, but he chose to ignore it for now. His mother was in good spirits, and he did not want to make her worry. He continued his tale, describing the strange rune craftsman who had changed his life. My lady, it's time for bed. Wade? NWO. Iced Twill. Before she could finish, the elven lady's head sank gently against her son's chest. Arthur carried her upstairs after a long day spent talking. When evening came, they shared wine together and this was the result. Mother could never hold her wine. Some things never change. After smiling he adjusted her weight carefully and made sure not to wake her. The scent of moon blossoms lingered in her hair, just as he remembered from his childhood. Her breathing was calm, her face peaceful despite the faint shadows of exhaustion beneath her blindfold. Arthur held her close as he ascended the stairs, one arm beneath her knees and the other around her back. She muttered something in her sleep, her hand still clutching the hem of his shirt as though afraid he might vanish. The hallways of the villa were silent except for the soft echo of his footsteps. Moonlight streamed through the windows, painting the floor with silver. Even if the world outside was an illusion, it looked breathtakingly real. He pushed the bedroom door open with his shoulder. The room appeared exactly as he remembered it. Blue drapes framed the windows, silver embroidery trimmed the bed, and candlelight glowed softly across a table scattered with threads and teacups. He laid her down gently, adjusting the pillows until she rested comfortably. Sleep well, mother. He whispered while pulling the bed sheet over her. The sight roused old memories. This was not the first home they had shared, nor was it the second. They had moved often, driven out by danger and constant attempts on their lives. It was no surprise that someone had tried to harm his mother while he was away, though the last attack had been promised to be the final one. Lying bastard! The thought burned in his mind. He had trusted his father to protect her. He had left believing that, with his absence, those in the palace would forget about them. He was wrong. The attempt had come from within, of that he was sure. It must have been one of his brother's mothers, each of them envious of her beauty and grace. Once certain she was resting, Arthur stepped quietly into the hallway. The villa was still, bathed in the glow of candlelight that shimmered against the walls. Silmara waited near the stairway, her expression grim. She knew what he wanted. Silmara, tell me. How did this happen? It was one of those harpies, wasn't it? His voice trembled with anger, his mind filled with the faces of 4 women. He could not be sure which one was responsible, but he was determined to find out. Silmara lowered her eyes and clasped her hands tightly before her apron. For a moment, she said nothing. Only the faint crackle of the candles filled the silence between them. Then she drew in a breath and began to speak. It was about a year ago, several years after you left. At first, things were peaceful. The Duke's orders were strict. No one from the main household was allowed to approach us directly. All food and supplies came through the usual channels, checked by the clerics before entering the villa through the teleportation gate. Arthur's brow furrowed when the maid mentioned the timeline. His mother had been blind for an entire year, and he had known nothing about it. Even if he had known, there would have been nothing he could have done. He had been powerless. Though he blamed himself for that, his rage began to turn toward someone else. And yet someone or something slipped through. Regrettably, someone tampered with the lady's favorite tea leaves. Her favorite tea leaves? Silmara nodded slowly and continued. Yes. It happened on one of the usual supply days. The crates arrived as they always did, sealed and blessed by the clerics before we received them. Nothing seemed unusual. There were no signs of foul play. The lady asked for her favorite brew. Her voice faltered. She did not want to say what happened next, but she forced herself to go on. The lady was bedridden for days. The clerics rushed in to care for her, and although her life was saved, her eyes could not be restored. It was some kind of side effect from the poison. Arthur's jaw tightened as he listened. What happened to the servants who checked the crates? To my knowledge, they were all apprehended and executed. I see. Arthur remained silent, lost in thought. It was clear to him that someone from outside had been responsible. The women who lived with his mother were like family. They had served her since his birth, and if they had wanted her dead, they would have acted long ago. That left the servants from beyond the household. They were people who could have been bribed, blackmailed, controlled by magic, or connected to the cultists. Could it have been Ivan's wife or his mother? After the recent incident, they seemed the most suspicious, yet he could not dismiss the other three ladies. His mother had always been an inconvenience to them. She had no family background or noble blood. They never accepted her, and with only a few loyal maids by her side, she had no one to defend her. She had been a target for as long as he could remember, and the Duke's only form of help had been to confine her, keeping her hidden from harm. Why didn't the Duke restore my mother's eyesight? With his resources, he should have been able to ask the church for help. Arthur knew that certain ailments could be cured through the power of Tier 4 clerics, who were on the same level as his father. If the Duke had truly wanted to heal her, he could have made a deal with the church. Yet he had not. I don't know. Maybe it was impossible. Silmara didn't seem very knowledgeable about the situation, and that was not surprising. She was only a maid who could ask the guards bringing in supplies for information. Just like his mother, she was confined to this place. Everything was monitored from the outside, yet even with that, his mother had suffered what seemed to be irreparable damage to her eyesight. Nothing is impossible. Arthur muttered to himself as he turned around and walked down the stairs. Several theories were already forming in his mind. The most obvious was the Duke's indifference, either because he refused to negotiate with the church or simply did not care. Another possibility was that he wanted to avoid angering his other wives and being accused of favoritism. Tier 4 clerics were expensive, and given his high status, the church would likely demand more than just gold in return. For the time being, he excused himself and went to his old room. This villa had been the last one he stayed in, yet it still filled him with a deep sense of nostalgia. Once inside, he sat near the window and looked outside. It was quite a sight. The moonflowers on the lake began to glow as the false moonlight touched them, and in the distance, he could see a small shrine dedicated to the twin deities of the moon, Lunaris and Lunaria. Could the moon elf clerics help Mother? Now that he understood the situation, his thoughts began to race. If his father refused to help, then it was up to him. There were a few options before him, one of which was still the path toward the dukedom. If he managed to defeat his brothers, making a deal with the church might still be possible. Another option was to seek help elsewhere, though that path seemed daunting since his father would never allow his mother to be freed. As he pondered, an image came to his mind, an armored man who always seemed to have the right answers. Could he do it? Arthur remembered a group of injured knights, all of whom had lost limbs that were later replaced through mechanical means. The idea of his mother undergoing such procedures, however, filled him with dread. He wanted her to be free of pain, not endure more of it. The knights had already lost their limbs, but his mother had not, and he doubted whether such a transformation could even restore her senses. Repairing movement was one thing, but restoring sight or hearing was something else entirely. Within the confines of his old room, he sat alone. The moonlight fell softly across his face, yet he barely noticed it. His thoughts moved in restless circles, caught between anger and guilt. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw his mother smiling, her hands trembling as they reached out to feel his face. He thought of his father's broken promise, the lack of information that had followed the attack, and the long year his mother had endured in isolation. Crunch! The sharp sound of breaking glass snapped him out of his thoughts. He looked down at the wine glass in his hand. It was shattered, and dark red wine spilled across the floor. His hand was uninjured, his Tier 3 body far too resilient to be harmed by ordinary glass. I should clean this up and go to sleep. Mother will worry. Arthur gathered the broken shards one by one, careful not to leave even a sliver behind. He sighed quietly and fetched a cloth from a nearby basin, dabbing at the spot until the stain began to fade. He could have called the maids, but he knew they would only worry. It was not the first time he had done something like this. As a child, he often hid the injuries he got from climbing trees and running around the villa. When the floor was clean, he tossed the cloth aside and sank into the chair again. The villa was silent. Only the whisper of wind through the chimes outside filled the room. His thoughts drifted toward his mother upstairs, and his eyes grew heavy. Tomorrow I'll make her smile again, at least for the short time I'm here. But then... He leaned back, closed his eyes, and let exhaustion pull him under. Morning came, and he opened his eyes to the pale light of the sun above. Though the fatigue of the night still clung to him, the gentle sound of birds slowly eased it away. After washing his face, he stepped into the corridor and made his way toward the dining hall. His mother was already there, sitting by the window with a cup of tea between her hands. The blindfold still covered her eyes, yet her posture was as graceful as ever. Silmara and the other maids stood nearby, quietly setting the table. "Good morning, mother," Arthur said, his voice soft and gentle. Illyria turned toward the sound, and a tender smile spread across her lips. "Arthur, you're up early. Did you sleep well?" "Well enough. The villa hasn't changed much. It still feels like home." "That's good to hear. Now eat, my son. I told Silmara to prepare your favorite breakfast." He looked down at the plate, where fresh bread and moonberry jam awaited him. A faint smile touched his lips as old memories surfaced. His mother had always loved plants from her homeland. The days that followed were quiet and peaceful. Arthur stayed by her side, helping with the garden, walking with her by the lake, and listening to her stories. She seemed happy, laughing softly whenever he teased her about the stubborn herbs or the lazy maids. For 3 days, the world outside ceased to exist. At night, they sat beneath the moonlight, sharing tea while the lake reflected the fake moon like glass. Arthur spoke of his travels, though he left out the darker parts. His mother's laughter filled the air, and for a time, it felt like the world had healed. But peace did not last long. On the morning of the 4th day, a faint shimmer appeared near the villa gate. Silmara came forward with the other maids to take the crates of supplies they usually brought in, but there was more than just provisions. "A message has arrived from the Duke's retainers. You are ordered to return to the palace." "I see." Arthur's expression darkened, but he knew the moment would pass. He still had to manage Albrook and the city they had seized from Theodore. His older brother would surely redouble his efforts against them, and Arthur would need every bit of focus if he hoped to gain the influence required to help his mother. "So soon? I suppose they will not let me keep you here forever." Arthur knelt and took his mother's hands. "I will come back, mother. I promise." "I know you will." Her fingers brushed his cheek the same way they always did. "Be careful, my son. The world outside these walls is far less kind than the one here." "Oh." Just as she was about to finish, she recalled something and called out to him with a smile. "Yes, mother. And bring that friend of yours. I must thank him for taking care of you." He bowed his head and rose. "I will bring him when I can." He turned toward the waiting gate. The villa's peaceful illusion faded behind him as he passed through. Everything blurred, and he reappeared in the chamber he had traveled through. It was no surprise that someone was already waiting for him. "My lord. This is for you, my lord." A few knights stood by in golden armor, clearly aligned with Julius. One handed him a letter. His brother wanted to see him after his visit with his mother, but he did not seem to be alone. "I see. Let us not keep brother Julius waiting then." Arthur told the knights who had come to escort him, and he moved forward. Doubt lingered in the back of his mind. At first, he had wanted to support his eldest brother over the others, but he was no longer certain. Everything depended on who was responsible for his mother's loss of sight, and if it proved to be one of his brothers, he would not hesitate to point his rapier at them or their mothers. Fascinating, it works. And on the first try, no less. "You, my friend, are truly a genius, second only to me." Halbrecht's laughter echoed through the chamber, joined by a round of applause from his many assistants. Roland, however, stood silently beside him, wondering if this success meant he would finally be dismissed. Since arriving in the magical laboratory, he had spent his days carrying out the head researcher's endless requests. If it had only been about assembling the prototype, the work could have been finished in a single day, but they kept asking him questions about completely unrelated matters. What he had created for them consisted of several items. One was similar to the bracelets he had used before, and he had even given this strange professor one that was used in the incident for study purposes. Another was a helmet designed to block out the signal more efficiently. He had also helped them develop runic software capable of handling relics that could multiply their dream signal, as in the recent incident. Although they still needed to integrate everything with the tower spirit, he had already provided all the tools necessary to address the issue. Even so, they still refused to let him leave. "Sure. I think that's enough. I should be free to leave now, right?" Yes, in due time, my genius friend. But first, show me again your plan for that tunnel system. It could revolutionize the whole island, and what about that armor of yours? As I already said, the cultists somehow forced the super dungeon to expand beneath the island and controlled the intensity of the dungeon break, and as for my armor, you can't have it. He rolled his eyes inside his suit and had to smack the old man's hand away when the man tried to touch the armor without permission. Yes, quite fascinating. This created a network of tunnels reinforced by mana that require no further reinforcement or expansion. How lovely. Yes, we would just need to build an underground railway system after mapping the tunnels properly. The only problem would be removing traces of corruption and making sure the cult does not trigger any more breaks while the railway is operational, but the cost would be... Before he could continue, the mad scientist interrupted. Indeed, we could leave golems to guard the underground. A simple matter. Roland looked at the old man and wondered if he understood how expensive such an undertaking would be. The area the tunnels covered was enormous, and they would first need to send in an army or hundreds of adventurers to examine everything. It would take some time to become profitable, but transporting resources through the underground would be much safer than using regular merchant convoys. It could also make travel between cities much faster, possibly allowing people to work in one place and live in another. I have to get out of here. What if I knock this guy out and make a run for it? He glanced at the man who continued to babble and then at the golems around them. He had already analyzed them and could disable them if he wanted. Yet running away now would jeopardize all the good faith he had built. For the time being, he decided to answer, hoping the old man would eventually tire of asking questions and let him go home. Large doors swung open as an armored man pushed them aside. For a moment, Arthur looked at the person seated inside. It was his older brother Julius, a man he had only glimpsed during his previous stays in the palace. Their age difference was nearly 10 years, and they had always lived in separate worlds. Arthur had been treated as a prisoner, confined to illusory spaces under the pretense of safety. His mother was occasionally allowed to go outside, but even that stopped as the attempts on her life grew more frequent. During the rare gatherings of nobles, Arthur saw his older brothers, yet none of them ever showed any interest in him or spoke to him. Most of his memories from those events were of sitting quietly in a corner, waiting for the evening to end. For a child who only wanted to play and have fun, it was painfully dull. Now, the most distinguished of his brothers sat before him. Julius was considered a strong candidate to become the next duke, though because of their father's distrust of the church, Theodore's chances were also substantial. Ah! Julius sat at a table with a teacup in his hand. When the doors opened, he looked up and saw his younger brother. To Arthur's surprise, a smile appeared on Julius's face. The two had never been close, but after the recent incident with the cultists, their relationship had grown a little warmer. Good day, brother Julius. Arthur entered the room awkwardly, unsure how to behave. He tried to offer a small bow, the kind nobles of lower rank gave to those above them. During the cult attack, he had not been as courteous and had even given orders to people above his status, but now the situation was different. Before he could finish the gesture, Julius raised his hand to stop him. There is no need for that, Arthur. We are brothers and comrades in arms. Arthur straightened his posture, uncertain whether Julius's warmth was genuine or a carefully constructed act. If he had met with him before visiting his mother, he would have been overjoyed by this treatment, but now he was unsure what to think. It was possible that his brother or Lady Aurelia had caused his mother harm. If that were true, he would have to seek revenge, and Julius would become his enemy. I see. Then, brother Julius. Just call me Julius. Fine then, Julius. Why did you want to see me? It seemed his brother wanted to grow closer to him, and Arthur was not in a position to refuse. He was also interested in gaining new allies and gathering information. If Julius was an enemy, earning his trust would make it easier to learn more about him. For now, Julius appeared sincere and seemed capable of setting aside old grievances and matters of rank. He did not seem like a bad person, so Arthur decided to give him the benefit of the doubt for the time being. The air inside Julius's chamber carried a faint scent of rose oil. Sunlight filtered through the stained glass, scattering colored patterns across the table where several religious symbols lay beside a map of the area. First of all, Julius began as he poured another cup of tea. Congratulations on gaining father's favor. That is no small feat. But you should be careful of Theodore. He will probably not let this matter rest. I'm sure he won't, but I don't intend to let him either. Haha, that's my younger brother. Julius seemed genuinely happy as he spoke with Arthur, which surprised him. Regrettable, so regrettable. Julius said, leaving Arthur confused. What is regrettable? It is regrettable that this is the first time I am having a real conversation with my own brother. We should have done this long ago. Arthur was not sure what to make of it. If Julius was lying, he hid it well. His brother seemed truly regretful about how their relationship had unfolded. As the firstborn, Julius carried favor but also many responsibilities. His training to become a paladin of Solaria took him away from the main island for a time, and during his absence, Theodore managed to catch up. What's done is done. There is no use dwelling on the past when we have the future ahead of us. Haha, well spoken. Julius replied warmly and leaned back. The two exchanged small talk as they tried to make up for lost time, but eventually Julius revealed why he had taken time out of his day to speak with Arthur. Tell me, Arthur, are the rumors of the sacred beast in your city true? Ah? The Sunlight Wolf? Yes, it exists. It seemed that Arthur would need to thank his friend once again, as the icebreaker turned out to be Agni, his tamed beast. To him, it was just a normal creature, but to the church it was a bearer of good fortune and something sacred that should be protected. He was not sure why, yet it did not matter. Having Julius on his side was worth far more. If they grew closer, he would also have a chance to meet Lady Aurelia, who even if she proved innocent, might still shed light on other potential suspects such as Lady Layla, Celeste, and Scarlet. Could I see it? Julius sounded rather bashful, as if he was not used to asking people for favors. His brother's voice carried an almost boyish curiosity. For a moment, Arthur forgot his doubts and saw not a rival or a schemer but simply a curious brother. If you ever visit Albrook, I'll arrange it. Is it truly possible, just like that? I don't see why not. It is the tamed monster of my knight commander. You've met him already. Him again? Where did you find a man with such talents? Arthur chuckled, unsure how to answer the question. In truth, he had done very little himself and had been carried forward mostly by Roland's brilliance. In the latest incident, people had confused Roland's plans with his own and believed Arthur was responsible for everything, not the runic craftsman. Yet, with Roland's blessing, he kept silent and accepted most of the praise. I was just in the right place at the right time. Ha, some say that good luck is a skill too. Some do say that. The two laughed and continued talking about Albrook. Arthur was not surprised that his brother was already informed about the Solarian order of paladins that had made Albrook their home. With his arrival, more people would likely take interest in the city, so there was no reason for him to refuse this request. He was unsure what he could ask as a reward, but Julius had already offered something. Splendid. Perhaps after I visit your city, you would like to visit mine. I will show you the fruits of unbroken faith in the goddess. His brother was something of a zealot, and his territory contained a great number of churches and places of worship. It was a good idea to visit other regions across the island to see what he was dealing with, although traveling always carried its risks. I will keep that in mind. When I am free, I will be sure to come and visit. Haha, I will be sure to remind you later. Julius chuckled softly, then turned his gaze toward the map. Regretfully, I think we will have to conclude matters here. Father has been distant lately, and the other nobles are still in discussion. Indeed. Arthur rose from his chair as the two concluded their business and agreed to meet later in Albrook. Their father remained as distant as ever and seemed more interested in the affairs of the island than in speaking to his sons, who had just survived a life-and-death encounter. Only a few trusted high nobles still stayed in the palace, conducting strategy meetings to which the brothers were not invited. Oh, and before you leave. Julius glanced toward one of the maids standing nearby. She stepped forward, carrying several sealed scrolls bearing the Duke's crest. It seems father finally remembered your existence. These are the official documents for the stewardship of Aldbourne. You are its legitimate lord now, deed and all. No more arguments from Theodore or the others. Arthur was not sure why these papers were handed to his older brother to deliver, but it was not out of character for their father or other nobility. He accepted the scroll quietly. The golden wax seal shimmered faintly in the light. My thanks, brother. No need for formality. Julius waved his hand dismissively, and the two brothers parted with a firm handshake. There was nothing more for Arthur to do. His other brothers had no interest in speaking with him. Theodore had already departed, Yvonne had been confined to an undisclosed location, and Tybalt was nowhere to be found. With this in mind, Arthur left the island capital. This time, no one stopped him. He was escorted by a group of soldiers to the middle grounds, where Mary and his 2 knights awaited him. "Lord Arthur!" Mary shouted as she ran toward him. Sir Gareth and Sir Morian followed close behind, their faces pale as if they had not slept through the entire ordeal. Arthur barely had time to speak before Mary pressed a hand against his chest, as though she needed to be certain he was real. "They wouldn't let us in, my lord. We waited here for nearly a week." "A whole week?" Gareth and Morian nodded, which made Arthur glance toward the spot they had come from. He noticed something that looked like a tent in the distance. "Did you stay in that? Why didn't you wait at the mansion?" "How could we wait there, Lord Arthur? We needed to be here to welcome you. They refused to tell us anything." Mary's voice trembled with frustration. She shot an angry look at one of the nearby soldiers, who quickly turned away, fear in his eyes. Arthur did not yet know what had happened, but it was clear that Mary had been pestering the guards ever since the incident began. "Mary." Arthur spoke softly and placed a hand over hers. Her trembling stopped almost instantly, though her bottom lip still quivered with anger. "I'm fine. It took longer than expected, but everything is over now." Mary looked unconvinced, but she released his tunic and stepped back. Gareth and Morian exchanged glances, relief washing over their faces. "So, Sir Wayland?" Morian asked carefully. "Is he not with you, my lord? Did he?" Arthur shook his head. "He is safe. Or at least he was the last time I saw him. He stayed behind to finish some work with the mages. He will return soon." He did not add the rest because he truly did not know where Roland had ended up. The only information he had received was that Roland was working with the Duke's main researcher, helping to build something that could one day counter the abyssal effect. "I wonder if he will share this knowledge with the Royalist faction or keep it as a bargaining chip." As Arthur and the others returned to their temporary mansion, he could not help thinking about his friend. If the Duke decided to, Roland could be forced to remain within the palace and never return. He possessed valuable knowledge that could be sold to other factions for a substantial amount of money. The Solarian Church did not share its secrets willingly either, otherwise, the Duke would likely have known beforehand how the relics worked, and the entire incident would have ended before it began. "Do not worry, Lord Arthur. Sir Wayland always finds a way out of trouble. I am sure he will be back soon." "You are probably right. How about we have something to eat? You 3 look like you have not eaten in a while." On cue, a loud stomach growl broke the silence. It did not come from either of the knights but from the head maid, who blushed and lowered her cat ears in embarrassment. Arthur covered his mouth and chuckled, and soon the 3 returned to the mansion to enjoy a well-deserved feast. The days blurred together, filled with the hum of magical instruments and the tinkering of countless tools. Although Halbrecht's laboratory no longer felt like a prison, Roland still felt confined, as if trapped beneath layers of curiosity and bureaucracy. He had long since stopped counting how many times the professor called him my dear fellow researcher or my genius friend. Fascinating, it works. And on the first try, no less. "You, my friend, are truly a genius, second only to me." Halbrecht's voice boomed again as a pale blue projection shimmered above the runic console. Symbols and characters danced across it, forming not the usual chaotic runes but actual language and sleek geometric lines that created a clean, organized interface. "It's just a user interface, not a miracle. You could have done this yourself if you focused on something for once," Roland said with a sigh as he examined the simplified runic operating system he had recreated. His new companion had pressured him into revealing some of his knowledge and performing several upgrades to improve the mage tower. The consoles they had been using were quite primitive, relying on an outdated magic system that was far less efficient than Roland's own runic designs. With the new modifications, their research could now be properly compartmentalized and managed. "You cannot blame me," Halbrecht said with a grin. "There is simply too much wonder in this world. With this enhancement, my work will be exactly 78.56% more efficient." 78.56%, hey! Roland was wearing a helmet, so whenever he rolled his eyes, no one noticed. Even so, his efforts were not entirely wasted. He was making an impression on a man of considerable influence. The man was the Duke's chief researcher and held a great deal of power. If anyone could help Roland return to his own workshop, it was him. This was the main reason Roland decided to share some of his knowledge to present himself as a useful ally. One of the research points he introduced was deliberately chosen because it required him to leave the tower to complete it. Now, let us test the main screen. Show us the primary schematics. Halbrecht cackled while one of his assistants moved their fingers over the new console. The simplified runic operating system resembled a modern computer. It used a regular keyboard and mouse to navigate through simple icons and processes. It took the assistant a moment to locate the folder containing the schematic, but soon it appeared on the brand new monitor, and the research team cheered again. There it is, the runic radio network system. The name suits it well. How did you come up with it? It just came to me. Roland lied easily. In this world, radio waves were an unknown concept. Everything relied on magical systems that served the same functions as modern technology. Electricity, microwaves, and radio waves all existed but could only be accessed through knowledge few possessed. He had already done research to create radio towers that could replace magical communication through crystal balls. The technology was feasible, but he lacked the funds to construct it on a large scale. With the Duke's support and an official project, they could finally begin building such towers and introduce radio technology to the world. Even data transmission through cables was possible, and the underground tunnels could also be used for it. Marvelous! Imagine it! Messages completely untraceable through any known method. If this theory is correct, then it would form an entirely new system, a technology never before seen. And my name, Halbrecht III, will go down in history. I will be even greater than my grandfather. The man burst into laughter as the room filled with applause. Roland did not care who received the credit for the invention, as he preferred to remain unmentioned. I hope this is enough to get me out of here. His only true goal was to gain Halbrecht's favor and leave. Still, he intended to take something useful with him. The new materials, such as the glass-like substance and the process for creating it, had already caught his attention. The golems stationed along the walls were highly advanced and might help him solve problems in his own designs. Even the radio tower system was something he could also use. Now then, about me Levy. Before he could finish, the old man turned and gave him a hearty pat on the back. Haha, good, good. Rest for now, my friend. In the morning, help me sort through these research papers. I am still not sure how these radio waves work. Should I do it? One good push and he will go out the window. Roland looked down at his fist and then at the babbling man in front of him. Behind the man, a large transparent panel that looked like glass filled the wall. In truth, the material could become clear while remaining solid. Halbrecht stood directly against it, and Roland wondered if shoving him through and running was an option. It had been more than a week since the Duke ordered him to lend his expertise to this man. Even after building the prototype, the man would not stop talking about his own greatness and the promise of new inventions. Now the man wanted Roland to reconfigure the entire mage tower to improve its efficiency. If this carried on, Roland could be trapped here for months or longer. For a moment, he imagined pushing the man out and smashing through the glass wall. The Duke was present, but the man himself would not concern himself with a Tier 3 class holder. At most, the other high-level knights and perhaps the Grand Knight Commander would interfere. Still, the plan could not be carried out as too much was at stake. He might manage to escape, but he would be hunted for damaging part of the mage tower and for hijacking a teleport gate to flee. If he no longer had a home to return to in Albrook, leaving the island might have been tempting. But he had put down roots here, and starting over somewhere else would not be easy. I'm not sure Lydia would like to live in one of the other countries after all that has happened. When he first arrived in Albrook, he was not sure he would stay there for long. If the dungeon did not allow him to reach Tier 3 quickly, he might have reconsidered and gone elsewhere. Now, however, there were too many people who relied on him, so for the time being he needed to restrain himself from doing anything too reckless. Haha, excellent work as always, my genius friend. The man who looked like a mad scientist held a schematic up to the glass, letting the light shine through it. Now then. As he examined a design involving golems and several of the appliances Roland used in Albrook, the man turned around and took out something that looked like a badge. An access key. I do not even need to explain it. Very good. Truly extraordinary. Roland saw that what he was given resembled the badge attached to his armor. It was an identification sigil that could open restricted areas and operate sealed mechanisms throughout the tower. The badge was circular, made from enchanted metal, with faint inscriptions glowing along its edge. The one you are wearing is the temporary researcher key. This one, however, is the permanent version. Permanent? Do you mean? Roland went pale beneath his helmet as he heard this. He knew the tower was divided into sections, and his current badge only granted access to specific rooms. If this man was giving him one that could open more chambers, it might mean he intended for him to stay here permanently. Indeed, my genius friend. You can use it to return here so we can continue our research together. Return. That word caught his attention. So you mean? I can leave now. Of course you can leave. This is not a prison. The old man cackled again, and before Roland could ask any more questions, he continued speaking. Of course, before we start this project I'll have to convince those stingy nobles to fund it. Once that is done and the tunnels are explored thoroughly, we can plan the cabling and tower placement. I'll be sure to build a prototype based on the schematics you designed, but first I'll need to study them carefully. I see. So. I'll stay in touch. Roland did not bother arguing with the man, who was already mumbling to himself. Instead, he took the key from the desk. After more than a week of feeling like a glorified assistant trapped inside a cage of glowing panels, there was finally light at the end of the tunnel. A quick scan told him the key was genuine, and he began to quietly leave Halbrecht's office before the old man could finish his rambling. Almost there. Just as he reached the sliding door, the old man turned sharply toward him. Wait. Is something wrong? I'll stay in touch with your people through my people. Roland said, trying to edge closer to the exit. You need to take these research papers. Did you think I would let you leave empty-handed? Halbrecht hurried over and handed him a thick book filled with strange theories. Roland flipped through the pages and realized that no ordinary person would be able to make sense of what this eccentric scientist had written. Oh, I just can't wait. Once the network is created, we'll be able to exchange knowledge with each other and other brilliant minds. The age of knowledge is upon us. In truth, what Roland had given the man resembled a primitive version of the modern internet and radio technology. The current method of communication consumed vast amounts of mana, and magical letters carried certain risks. If they succeeded in creating a true network that used cables and radio towers, information, drawings, and schematics could be shared instantly. Printers did not yet exist in this world, but once data transfer was established, even that could become a reality. While the research exchange appeared one-sided at first glance, he still gained certain advantages from it. To ensure that he would not be betrayed, he embedded a hidden access point for himself within every piece of technology he shared. If those creations were ever turned against him, he would be able to disable or alter their behavior immediately. In a way, building a connected network through his inventions also gave him the ability to monitor the cities where they were installed. Halbrecht was intelligent but too eager to experiment without proper testing. By setting up the networks with the runic routers and switches he provided, Halbrecht was unknowingly doing Roland a favor. This seems to contain the secrets of that barrier. Yes, those are my grandfather's old research notes. I've analyzed them many times already, but I'm sure they can help you with your research, my friend. Just be sure to inform me when you make any more breakthroughs. Sure. I'll be going now. Don't worry, I know the way out. Roland took the notes and placed them into one of his spatial runes. He had already studied the layout of this place and knew the way out. Halbrecht laughed at his words and nodded. Farewell, my friend. Let us meet again to discuss magic and science. His steps were quick, and soon he arrived before the platform that had brought him in. Behind him, an awkward scene was unfolding as all the research assistants stood up to applaud while he waited for the elevator doors to close. He had spent over a week with them, and for some reason, they regarded him as a kind of teacher. They are probably just happy that I made their work easier for them. With the implementation of the runic systems, their tasks would become much simpler. Creating schematics on the screens through a basic scanning process was far easier than performing an entire magical ritual. Authorization, Elite Researcher Clearance. Once the elevator doors closed and the glass panels turned into white stone, the tower spirit spoke to him. It was similar to Sebastian but had fewer features. Roland had shared some information about tower spirit techniques, yet Halbrecht still did not know the full extent of Sebastian's abilities. If he did, Roland was certain that Halbrecht would have wanted to see them in action. It was a secret advantage Roland had planned to use if he was forced to stay longer, but fortunately, that would no longer be necessary. He found himself inside the tube once again, yet this time he figured how it all functioned. Just as he had expected before arriving, the entire place was influenced by layered spatial and gravitational magic, some of which was even worth studying. Although it appeared that he was moving up and down, the platform beneath him was actually shifting sideways, downward, and upward at irregular intervals. The mechanism was designed to confuse and trap anyone who tried to escape. Finally, I can go home. As he neared the true exit, he reflected on the entire incident and how smoothly it had gone. They had succeeded in obtaining the deed to Theodore's city and now needed to prepare for retaliation. Although he could not attack them directly, he certainly would not ignore them. This meant that the city of Aldbourne required immediate attention. In Albrook, they had him and Sebastian, along with an extensive monitoring system to keep everyone under control. They would need to build a similar system in the new city and determine what kinds of trade they could start. It was almost certain that Theodore would not allow anyone from their new city to make profitable trades within his territory. Because of that, they would have to establish new trade routes for their citizens, and if the underground railroad plan succeeded, it might become a real possibility. I have already mapped out the entire area, but the costs will be high. The first idea involved creating an underground subway and expanding it to other cities instead of keeping it limited to Aldbourne and Albrook. Once established, their system could serve as one of the major hubs that connected all routes, drawing trade directly to them. Another possibility was forming trade agreements with other territories and perhaps creating a network of flying ships. The cities owned by the Valerian brothers usually had at least one flying shipyard that could be used for commerce. Arthur seemed to get along with Julius, which could provide another opportunity. Roland was unsure about the others, but Julius appeared to be a promising ally. There was also the fact that Yvon had lost his territories, which had been taken over by other nobles. Those nobles might be open to trade since earning money was one of their favorite pursuits. Well, I should get home before making any plans. I'm not safe yet. At last, the platform stopped and a passage opened before him. It led into another white corridor, but this one had an exit. It did not lead to any teleportation gates. Instead, it opened into a large enclosed hub area. Another empty room, but this time around. The chamber was quite large, with many hidden paths leading elsewhere. However, the most important path lay directly ahead. Once he used the elite researcher key, a wide passage opened forward. This time it was no illusion but a real exit, and just as he expected, people were already waiting for him outside. The air outside the tower was refreshing compared to the magically filtered air inside the mage tower. As he stepped out, he saw the tower behind him, much smaller than what was concealed within by overlapping spatial magic. His attention quickly shifted to the group before him, for the person waiting was not someone he had expected to meet before leaving. Sir Wayland. The voice came from the steps ahead, deep and stern. The Grand Knight Commander stood there, his silver armor gleaming even under the grey sky. A half-circle of knights flanked him, their weapons resting but ready to be drawn. I trust your cooperation with the Duke's researcher was fruitful. It was enlightening. Roland replied while studying the man. The commander was possibly a Tier 4 class holder or someone very close to reaching that level. We exchanged some knowledge, and the device has been completed. I'm sure His Grace will make good use of it. The commander gave a single nod, his expression unreadable. Then he stepped closer, close enough for Roland to see his own reflection in the polished chest plate. Very well. But the Valerian house doesn't take kindly to secrets being kept from us. You have proven useful, but usefulness is not immunity. Next time, you will bring such knowledge directly to the duchy. Is that clear? The words carried a clear warning. Although Roland had been helpful, not everyone approved of his methods. Some probably suspected him of loyalty to the church, since he lived in a city where paladins were trained. The Duke himself might have shared those doubts. To avoid further conflict, Roland simply bowed. Yes, sir. I will keep that in mind. As he spoke those words, the Grand Knight Commander's piercing eyes lingered on him for a moment longer, as if to weigh his honesty. Then the man turned sharply, the motion of his cloak snapping in the wind. Good. You may leave. My men will escort you to the gate. You have my thanks. The knights parted in silence, forming a narrow corridor for Roland to walk through. Their discipline impressed him, and their precise movements reminded him of golems that obeyed orders without hesitation. 4 of them accompanied him, guiding him toward a carriage. On the way back, he glanced around the area. Barely a week had passed since the attack on the palace, yet there were no visible signs of damage. He did not know how it had been done, but the entire place had been fully restored, and it was clearly not an illusion created by the barrier. Still a lot of soldiers around. I wonder if some cultists managed to get away. Many cultists had been killed, but a few had escaped and might even have blended in among the nobility. Even so, Roland doubted they could flee far. The Duke's forces were watching everything closely. Soldiers stood guard at every corner, and mages patrolled alongside them, scanning the air for traces of mana. Finally, after some time, he reached the inner gates and was told to leave the carriage. There was no inspection this time, and he did not need to remove his clothing. He was free to walk through, and once outside, he noticed something that caught his attention. They are still here. Now that he was in the middle section of the castle grounds, his senses picked up familiar movements. Arthur and the others were still nearby, though he had expected them to have left already. Without hesitation, he moved toward the location where they had spent time before. It was the tea house where they had nearly fought. Yvonne and Arthur was sitting outside. When they arrived here first, they weren't really taken seriously, but it was clear that things had changed. He wasn't there with just Mary but also with some other nobles, ones that were clearly trying to get into his good graces. They all were smiling while Arthur was drinking some tea and looking slightly annoyed. Yet, soon his friend's eyes landed on Roland walking forward. His armor was still quite red and noticeable, so singling him out of the crowd was quite simple. Is he coughing? Once Arthur laid his eyes on Roland, it seemed that he had swallowed his tea too fast, which caused him to cough. Even though he was a Tier 3 class holder, taking in hot liquid into the lungs would produce this effect. Mary appeared instantly to pat him on the back while the other nobles clamored to show their worth. Is he really? Roland was planning to just go into the tea house and wait downstairs or have a servant fetch his allies, but Arthur had other plans. Instead of just sitting there and pretending nothing had happened, Arthur suddenly pushed back his chair with a loud scrape, startling the group of nobles around him. Sir Wayland. The name escaped him before he could stop himself. The nobles turned, following his gaze toward the crimson-armored knight striding across the courtyard. Roland froze mid-step. For a brief second, their eyes met, and then Arthur moved. Without hesitation, he vaulted over the balcony railing. The nobles gasped. One of them shouted Lord Valerian, but by the time they rushed to the railing, Arthur had already landed on the ground floor with a heavy thud. His boots cracked the stone, a faint ripple of force dispersing from the impact as he absorbed the fall with his Tier 3 robustness. Mary leaned over the edge, exasperated but unsurprised. He could have just taken the stairs. She muttered under her breath before following his example. The nobles glanced over the edge at the man who had caught Arthur's attention, but did not recognize him at all. Roland's appearance was quite different from how he had presented himself during the noble gathering. My lord, you probably shouldn't be doing things like this out in the open. Roland said as Arthur straightened his coat and brushed the dust from his sleeves before walking forward. I only wanted to stretch my legs. The conversation in the tea house was rather dull. Roland tilted his head, knowing it was a lie, but chose not to comment. Instead, he simply nodded and smiled faintly beneath his helmet. Seeing the familiar faces of his companions lifted his spirits. Now that everyone was together again, they could finally leave this place and put the entire ordeal behind them. Is it fine to talk? It should be. I don't think they are keeping a watch on us right now. I believe we have gained some trust from the Duke and his people after the incident. I'm not so sure about that, my friend. At the very least, someone has grown interested in our little undertaking. I doubt we will be able to get away with as much as we did before. We should be careful for a while, at least until the envoys leave Albrook. That would probably be for the best, replied Roland as he spoke with Arthur. The two were still in Isgard, talking inside Arthur's temporary bedchambers, where they had set up a soundproof barrier. They had just returned from their meeting at the tea house and were discussing a small predicament. I suspected that your father would send his representatives eventually. We have been expanding quite rapidly, Roland said while looking out the window. No one had followed them back this time, as in the past, but that did not mean they were free from surveillance. After the incident, Arthur had been given the deed to another city, but they had also been assigned several chaperones. These individuals were expected to arrive later and report directly to the Duke while inspecting the city. On the surface, this seemed to be a routine check to ensure that the influence of the abyssal cult had not spread. In truth, it served another purpose entirely. The inspectors would be monitoring their business dealings and would certainly notice if large quantities of dungeon resources were being transferred into the guild and distributed among their associates. They had managed to avoid tax scrutiny before, but doing so now would not be as easy. Indeed, it is unfortunate. Still, I think we can conceal a few of our activities, but for now, we should be extremely careful. Roland nodded while glancing out the window. There were still ways to secure funds, and working with the underworld traders remained an option. We could use Madame Isis's and the Thieves Guild's services, although it will take more time and the fees will be higher than our usual share. I doubt the guild master will be pleased if we shift everything there, but there is little we can do about it. Arthur nodded. It was better to remain cautious. Even though their status had improved and tax evasion would no longer send them to prison, the penalties and fees would still slow their progress. The Adventurers Guild supported them, but if the Duke's people began to investigate closely, they would eventually uncover the truth. This left the Thieves Guild as their best alternative since it was harder to monitor, and they could always claim ignorance if necessary. Using the Thieves Guild as a scapegoat was an option, but it was not one they wanted to consider after finally earning the leader's trust. We'll see. For now, let's head back to Albrook, said Arthur while getting up from his seat. The teleportation gate restrictions should have been lifted by now. Roland looked at the timer on his helmet display. He had been counting the minutes as they passed. This time there was no order to the departures since they only needed to make an official appointment with the teleportation gate personnel. They were given a specific time for the gate's activation, which was exactly 30 minutes away. Shall we then? Before my father or that researcher you met changes their minds. Roland did not reply to the joke. Instead, he removed the soundproof barrier and began retracting the golems he had left outside. No one was following them anymore, but he still did not feel completely safe. They had never discovered who the men targeting them after their arrival truly were. Most likely, they were part of the abyssal cult, but that alone was not enough. Some of the nobles who had worked with the cult might still have been out there. Not everyone carried a parasite, which made identifying them far more difficult. Are we ready to depart? Yes, my lord. Mary responded with a small bow while Gareth and Morian took their positions on the flanks. Soon they were leaving in much the same way they had arrived, with rows of servants lined up on each side. Their carriage was brought out, and before long, they were on their way to the teleportation gate. It was not the same one they had used before, but the larger gate through which Julius and Theodore had arrived. There were fewer people gathered this time, although a few young nobles still waved from a distance as Arthur prepared to depart. Yet this was not the only surprise. Just as Roland was about to mount his horse, someone approached him. Sir Wayland. Master Anzanus. It was the same man who had assisted them during the recent incident. The old mage was powerful and had helped Roland create a breach in the palace barrier, as well as aided Arthur in destroying several occult relics. I thought he and Tybalt left a few days ago. Did he stay behind just to meet me? The mage slowed to a stop, his staff tapping lightly against the ground. Several soldiers and mages near the gate exchanged uneasy glances. This fire mage was known to be eccentric and not entirely loyal to Tybalt. From what Roland knew, he was one of the highest-ranking professors at another magical academy, someone whom Tybalt Valerian had likely bribed to serve as his knight commander. There was no law against appointing an older mage to such a position, but it was clear that Anzanus had his own motives. Ah, good, I caught you before you vanished, the mage said, trying to catch his breath. He was not alone, 3 other robed figures appeared behind him. They were mages as well, likely his personal students. You were about to depart without making good on your promise. Roland sighed inwardly. He had not been trying to avoid the man, but at the moment, all he wanted was to go home and rest. Anzanus's appearance also reminded him of the headmistress and the uncertainty of how she might react. You mean the matter of the library access? Don't worry, I'll have everything arranged once I return there, but for now. He responded and tried to mount his horse, but the old mage seemed to have other plans. Why don't I just come with you instead? I've heard that Albrook has its own gate, and since you're the deputy professor at Xandar's Institute of Wizardry, I'm sure you don't need an appointment to use it. Ah! It seemed the old mage had done his research. Roland had planned to delay this matter until after speaking with the headmistress and offering his apologies. If he went there now, he might end up spending more time than he could afford. The exams were approaching, and they involved sending students into a dungeon. He had intended to wait until the students departed before going himself. If he left immediately, the headmistress would likely assign him additional responsibilities as punishment. Fortunately, Arthur noticed his hesitation and understood his reluctance. Master Anzanus, could I have a word? Arthur's voice came from inside the carriage. Of course, young lord, please go ahead. Arthur had met Anzanus during the recent incident, and since they were on good terms, he chose not to interrupt and simply listened. My apologies, but for the time being, I need my knight to remain in the city. Several matters must be resolved first. Once they are settled, he will be free to fulfill the promise he made to you. I trust you understand. The old mage's brows furrowed at Arthur's words, his long white beard twitching as if in protest. For a moment, it seemed he might argue, for his reputation for stubbornness was well earned. Humph! Anzanus exhaled through his nose. His students stiffened behind him, clearly expecting a dispute. Fine, fine. I will relent for now. Within the carriage, Arthur inclined his head. Your understanding is appreciated, Master Anzanus. I promise that once our current affairs are in order, Sir Wayland will personally attend to your request. I will hold you to that. The mage said, wagging a finger at Roland. Do not think you will be rid of this old man so easily. I will send word through the mage network so you know how to contact me. Roland offered a polite bow. This meant the old mage would share the mana patterns of his crystal ball so Roland could call him later when he had time. Of course, Master Anzanus. I would never dare break a promise to someone as persuasive as you. The mage grunted in satisfaction, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. Not as persuasive as you were that time. The young lord still remembers and will probably reprimand me for talking to you for so long. But alas, have a safe trip. I will be waiting to hear from you. There was not much he could say to that. He had blackmailed him to help Arthur and Tybalt obviously held a grudge. Roland waited until the old mage finally turned away, his blue robe swaying as he disappeared beyond the line of guards. Only then did he exhale the breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The situation could have turned troublesome if Anzanus had insisted further. He's a powerful ally but quite persistent, isn't he? Arthur spoke from within the carriage in a teasing tone, and Roland nodded. Out in the open, however, he could not casually address Arthur or make any sarcastic jokes, so he simply behaved like a proper knight. We should depart, my lord. The teleportation gate is waiting. Fortunately, the gate was almost ready. Soon, he mounted his horse, and they moved forward. For a moment he looked around the area. A few nobles waved at them, hoping to make a good impression. Most of them were young, but that could change in the future. They had left their mark in Isgard, and Arthur had begun to earn genuine respect. The guards signaled the gate mage, and a faint shimmer filled the air as the teleportation circle activated. Layers of runes pulsed beneath the marble platform, bathing the surroundings in a soft azure glow. Roland took one last glance at the palace before turning toward the gate. Goodbye, Isgard. I hope I never have to return here again. As they stepped through the shimmering gate, the familiar sensation washed over him, and moments later, they reappeared in Albrook. The Lord is back. It's Sir Wayland, he looks as shiny as ever. When his vision cleared, they were standing at Albrook's main teleportation gate in the center of the city. As expected, citizens had gathered to welcome them, along with rows of soldiers who had stayed behind to guard the city. Arthur leaned out of the carriage window as the wheels clattered over the cobblestone road. The air of Albrook was crisp and familiar. Outside, people waved flags and scattered flower petals along the street. Children shouted his name, and merchants cheered from their stalls as the convoy moved down the main road toward the Valyrian mansion. Welcome home, Lord Valyrian. The High Knight Commander has returned. It was clear that both of them were quite liked by the citizens, but Roland paid little attention and focused instead on connecting with the city's runic network. The moment he arrived, a stream of information flooded his mind, revealing everything that had happened in their absence. The great distance between Albrook and Isgard had prevented any real-time updates. If they ever managed to install underground cables or use radio signals, that problem could finally be solved. Everything seems fine. A few burglaries here and there, but nothing serious. Sebastian had been in charge of overseeing the entire area and relaying information to their guards. The system was working perfectly, and Roland could even review recordings showing criminals being apprehended. Crime rates were at an all-time low, but fortunately, they still had other ways to keep the Thieves' Guild satisfied. Among the crowd, he spotted his wife standing with Armand and Lobelia. He wanted nothing more than to go to her and return home, but Arthur clearly had something to discuss, something he had not mentioned in Isgard. Instead of going to her and hugging her, he contacted her through the runic bracelet she had and spoke to her while riding down the road. How have things been? Was everything all right while I was gone? He asked, watching her fumble with the bracelet that vibrated when he made the connection. Ah, hello? Is that you, Wayland? Roland smiled beneath his helmet, but before they could start talking, another voice interrupted. It belonged to his brother-in-law. Was that Wayland's voice? You have to tell me what happened in Isgard. There have been some rumors about your exploits, and don't worry, just as I promised, I protected everyone when you were go out. Hey, why did you pinch me? Be quiet, you idiot. Try to have some sense for once. Just as Armand tried to continue, Lobelia pinched his arm again and pushed him aside. Let the two of them talk. It has been almost 2 weeks. Thank you, Lobelia. Roland's voice came through smoothly, and Armand finally moved his mouth away from the bracelet. Elydia, you were saying. There was a brief silence as Elydia pulled her hand back. She turned around and began whispering into the bracelet, trying not to let anyone else hear their conversation. Not much happened while you were away, dear. She said with a faint smile on her face. Everything in the workshop ran smoothly. I made sure Rastix didn't blow anything up, and the store managed to stay open. Is that so? He didn't say much in return. It was enough for him just to hear her voice after nearly 2 weeks in Isgard. He didn't know how long he would be able to enjoy her company, since he needed to go to the institute soon, so he let her talk without interrupting. Oh, there was a small incident with Agni. He got restless and disrupted the usual prayer. Is he all right? He's fine, just acting like a big baby as always. He settled down after an hour or so. Roland chuckled softly, but as they continued talking, the gates of Arthur's villa came into view. I should be home soon, but for now I need to finish a few things. I see, then take care, and don't take too long. I won't. They exchanged a brief goodbye as Arthur's carriage rolled into the estate. All the servants stood outside, bowing in unison as their lord stepped out. Roland followed behind Arthur, and once the doors closed behind them, he heard a long sigh. Finally back. I didn't think I'd grow so fond of this place, but here I am. Now then, Sir Wayland, I need to ask you something. I know you're tired, but this is important. Roland nodded, and the two of them moved forward. He had a feeling he knew what this was about. Arthur had recently visited his mother and had been acting strangely ever since. He hadn't spoken about it directly, so this was likely the moment he intended to come clean. They soon entered Arthur's office. Only Mary remained inside, with 2 guards posted outside the door, just as in many meetings before. Now then, my friend, I need to ask you something. Go ahead. What's troubling you? It's about our night troupe, the ones you enhanced with runic prosthetics. Do you want to know something specific? Does someone you know need a replacement limb? Was Arthur's mother injured and in need of a replacement prosthetic? This seemed to be true, but it was something more complicated than just a simple missing arm. As always, you catch on quickly. It's not about a limb, though. It's about the eyes. The eyes. The cyborg knights he had created with prosthetic limbs had grown quite skilled in using them, but there had never been time to focus on replacing missing eyes or ears. Attaching a runic limb to a monophantom was one thing, creating one that could handle the complexity of sight was another matter entirely. Yes, please sit down. Let me tell you what happened. After nodding, Roland listened as Arthur explained what had happened to his mother. She had been poisoned and had lost her eyesight. Roland was not a doctor, but he suspected the poison might have damaged the optic nerve or perhaps caused direct cellular damage to the eyes themselves. So her eyeballs are still intact? That might complicate things. Roland said thoughtfully. Will it? Yes, but it shouldn't be impossible. Arthur's expression brightened at those words. We would need to conduct some tests first, just like we did with the other prosthetics. But it should be possible. The monophantom was a peculiar phenomenon, and the research surrounding it was still new. Even so, with Roland's current understanding, it might be achievable. There were ways to connect directly to the optic nerve without removing the eye entirely, allowing a replacement to function much like a camera. At first, it might not match the quality of natural sight, but it was not beyond the realm of possibility. Awoo! No, down boy, don't you dare! Worf! I said Dao. Roland never finished the sentence because a speedy wolf collided with him and knocked him to the ground with a tackle of love. Fortunately, his superhuman strength and durability kept him safe from injury, though any normal person would likely have died from the impact. He slid across the ground, leaving long marks in the dirt. Woof! Stop licking me! He shouted in protest, but the Sunlight Wolf refused to listen. Eventually, Roland gave up and let him continue. Thankfully, he was still wearing his flame armor, which protected his face from getting too much slobber on it. Okay, I think that's enough. After half a minute of letting Agni enjoy himself, Roland finally stood up and pushed him away. The wolf jumped back and began darting around the area as if he were about to pounce again, stopping at the last moment each time. His massive paws left deep impressions in the ground, making Roland wonder if he should expand the area so Agni had more space to run around. Agni, I've got your favorite. Fortunately, Roland was not alone. Elydia arrived just in time to rescue him, carrying a platter of roasted meat seasoned to please Agni's refined palate. Despite being a creature born of fire, the wolf preferred his food mild. Here, have a bite and give me my husband back. Elydia laughed as she set the meal in an oversized steel bowl. Agni looked at the food, then at Roland, but his drooling betrayed his true priorities. In an instant, he began devouring the meat, leaving Roland free to head inside. Once home, Roland finally removed his helmet and looked at his beautiful wife directly, no screens or runic cameras between them. Elydia smiled softly as she watched him pull off the helmet. His hair was a bit longer now, and he had no time to shave. Faint lines of exhaustion around his eyes spoke of the stress that came with his duties in Isgard. Yet the warmth in his gaze that focused entirely on her made Elydia's heart skip a beat. You look like you haven't slept in days, she said while brushing a hand along his cheek. Did you even eat properly while you were there? Roland chuckled as she touched his short, scruffy beard. I did, though I would rather forget most of the meals that were not cooked by you. Those madmen in that mage tower ate nothing but dehydrated food. Luckily, I had your packed lunch to get me through it. Elydia let out a quiet laugh. Good to hear that, but perhaps it would be better if you rested now. How about a warm bath? Her voice softened, carrying a note of longing. She had not seen him in weeks, and neither had he seen her. Being surrounded by the unknown and constantly on edge was not good for the spirit. Roland tilted his head slightly, a small, genuine smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. That sounds perfect, but it would be even better if you joined me. He stepped closer and placed his gauntlet gently against her waist. Her hands rested on his armored chest, and a faint blush colored her cheeks. Elydia's heart fluttered at the closeness, at the familiar scent, and at the look in his eyes. I missed you, but perhaps you should remove this armor first and give me time to get ready. She spoke in a teasing tone, and a grin appeared on Roland's face. He was ready to lift her up and carry her away, but before he could, something unexpected happened. For a moment, the entire area shook as if struck by an unseen force from outside. A deep boom rattled the windows, and the following tremors sent several vases crashing to the floor. The runic lights flickered while dust rained from the ceiling. What in the world? Roland froze, his instincts immediately on alert. He raised a barrier that surrounded his entire home just as a second explosion echoed through the air. Outside, Agni barked furiously and then bolted toward the source of the chaos. What was that? Elydia's romantic tone vanished, replaced by confusion. We're not being attacked from outside. This came from within the compound. Roland blinked, wondering if someone had launched an assault on his home. The answer came quickly as smoke began rising from a familiar direction. Oh no, it's him again. Elydia groaned and pinched the bridge of her nose. Rasticks. Roland sighed and ran a hand down his face. Of course it's him. His shoulders slumped. I'll go check on him. Stay here. We don't know if there's anything hazardous in the smoke, he said as he placed a hand on Elydia's shoulder. A veil of mana surrounded her to block out any potential danger. He did the same for himself, and after grabbing his helmet, he headed outside to find the alchemist. I almost forgot that I live next to a mad scientist. The image of the deranged researcher from Isgard flashed through his mind as he stepped out. Rastix's workshop had gone up in flames more than once, and as Roland arrived, several golems were already spraying extinguishers to contain the fire. From within the thick smoke, the gnome alchemist finally appeared, holding something that looked like a small purple pellet between his fingers. I did it. Success. Rastix stumbled out of the workshop, coughing and laughing at the same time, the tips of his ears blackened with soot. His eyes gleamed with manic pride as he held the glowing pellet above his head like a trophy. Even the smoke rising from his beard didn't seem to bother him as he turned to Roland. Success, Sir Wayland. I've done it. The formula is complete. Roland wasn't sure what to say. He glanced at the purplish cloud hovering nearby. The smell was unpleasant, but at least it didn't seem poisonous to humans or other races. Good thing the contamination barrier caught all this smoke. It smells awful. He strengthened the shield generator around Rastix's workshop since fumes often escaped from it. A shimmering barrier enclosed the area, keeping the smoke from spreading. Soon, large fans began to spin, sucking in the air around them. The fans were connected to long tubes that led to a purification chamber designed to filter out toxins before releasing clean air back into the open. What is that? It smells worse than a decomposing body. Rastix's soot-stained face split into a wide grin as he proudly raised the purple pellet higher. Ah! That's the smell of progress. A symphony of alchemical exactitude and volatile artistry. I call it. He coughed violently, waving away the smoke. The Draconis allure. Roland stared at the walnut-sized orb in Rastix's hand, which was still giving off smoke and a sharp, pungent smell. Even though he wore armor and stood within a magical barrier, a faint trace of the aroma still reached him. He had no idea how the gnome managed to endure it and could only assume that Rastix was using a potion to counter the odor. I assume this is meant to attract lesser dragons? Roland asked. Precisely. Just as you ordered, and I, the great Rastix Zelbebanon, have delivered. The gnome declared, and just as before, Rastix held the pellet high in triumph, but his excitement soon faded. He swayed, then slumped forward and collapsed. Before he hit the ground, Roland caught him with a mage hand spell. The orb of Draconis allure was also secured by the spell and promptly locked away in a safe box. I did ask him to make something to attract draconids, but will this really work? Before setting out, Roland had decided to increase his levels in the draconid-infested dungeon. However, there were obstacles to overcome, such as the crowded adventurer base and the vast territory where the monsters roamed. To solve this, he had asked Rastix to create a powerful lure that would draw the creatures together. The gnome's research involved the pheromone glands of dragons and lesser dragons, and if successful, it could allow Roland to hunt them much more efficiently. He might cause a lot of collateral damage, but his work can't be denied. Rastix had caused plenty of destruction, yet replacing him was impossible. He had created the adhesive used for the runic prosthetics, a material that had to be produced constantly and kept secret from any imitators. Even though his lab seemed to explode every few months, the advantages of his inventions outweighed the trouble he caused. Still, it was difficult to ignore how inconvenient it was to have him living so close. The mana barrier surrounding his home helped, but if one of his experiments went wrong on a large enough scale, people could get hurt. I should find him a better place to stay. He can keep this one as his house. With that in mind, he decided to return home. Guards surrounded the property, a whole unit stationed to handle this mad alchemist if necessary. They could patch him up quickly, and he would be back to work the next day. Is he fine? Fine? No, I think he has a few screws loose in there. You know what I meant. Elydia said, frowning at Roland's poor attempt at a joke as he returned home. Agni had been forced to spend time outside the barrier, but now he was back to eating his food. He is fine. I'm not sure how, but he might be immortal. Roland shrugged. Even though Rastix constantly got himself into trouble, he always seemed to escape with only a few bruises. Perhaps that was why he kept putting himself in danger, as he never suffered any debilitating injuries that lasted. It's the third time this month. When will he learn? You are far too patient with him. Well, he does produce results. I've been thinking about giving him some land further north, but instead of that, why don't we return to the conversation we were having earlier about that bath? While the explosion shook his home, he refused to let it become an obstacle. He had spent too much time away and wanted at least one night of peace before leaving again. Without waiting for a reply, he tossed his helmet aside and caught his wife with one hand. Hey, put me down. No can do, Mrs. Wayland. He spoke with a grin, slinging her over his shoulder as he made his way to the bathing area. His gloves came off soon after, and when the door closed behind them, a trail of red armor pieces marked the path they had taken. The next morning, Roland woke early, long before the first light of the sun reached Albrook. The air was cool and carried the scent of morning dew mixed with the familiar fragrance of his wife, Elydia. Her hand rested in his, holding on tightly as she slept, and he carefully performed his usual maneuver to free himself from her grip without waking her. I wish I could sleep like a normal person again. Even after such an eventful day and night, he had not slept much, nor did he need to. His abilities allowed him to function for days without rest, and even when he did sleep, it was never for more than 4 hours. For someone with his workload, this was convenient, yet there were times when he wished he could simply sleep longer and go back to being a normal craftsman. His initial goal had been to open a shop in Albrook and spend his life running his own business. His wife had stopped working there since her passion lay elsewhere, and he was unsure what to do with the place as it was not generating much income. Even so, he still hoped that one day, if things settled down, he could return to those more peaceful times. Now then. Moving quietly, he rose, put on a shirt and trousers, and walked toward his workshop. The corridor lights flickered on as he passed, responding to his mana signature. He chose to take the regular stairs, taking time to look around the underground area. There was some clutter scattered about and clear signs of Bernier's recent work. After a few glances, he went to the elevator and descended into Sebastian's chamber. "Sebastian, give me the daily report." "As you wish." The screens lit up, displaying reports of events in the city since his return. Not much had changed there, but in Aldbourne, where his brother was stationed, there had been some changes. Right on time with the sanctions and tariffs. They are really trying to squeeze us dry. Trade was not entirely forbidden, but merchants traveling from Aldbourne through Theodore's lands now had to pay extra fees on everything. The surcharge was steep, starting at double the original cost, which made trading impossible. As a result, Albrook would need to support the new frontier city directly, although plans for that were already in motion. "Those tunnels will be our lifeline. We should prioritize placing golems there and building a basic subway system. I bet the Union dwarves will enjoy this project." Even without the Duke's backing, the city still had enough funds to begin work on a small-scale railway system. It would link the two cities together, and expanding it later would be far less expensive than constructing teleportation gates. "I added it to the notes, sir." "Is there anything else?" Sebastian asked as Roland's words appeared in the form of text. He was carefully planning for the future, making sure he would not forget any important projects. "First it's the Institute, then I can actually start working. Arthur should be able to handle Julius when he arrives, but he also wants me to work on that runic eye project." There was a lot to do, and he wished he could clone himself at this point. The main problem was leveling, which took far too much time. For now, he did not see any shortcuts like the ones he had used in the past. Name: Roland Arden L230. Classes: T3 Runesmith Overlord L55 Primary, T2 Runesmith Lord L50 Tertiary, T2 Runic Engineer L50 Secondary, T1 Mage L25X, T1 Runic Mana Scribe L25X, T1 Runic Blacksmith L25X. HP: 50836/50836. MP: 84281/96285. SP: 64599/69826. Strength: 340. Agility: 279. Dexterity: 372. Vitality: 354. Endurance: 389. Intelligence: 440. Willpower: 425. Charisma: 21. Luck: 12. Even after all of that, I've only gained 5 levels. While most people would see gaining 5 levels in just over an hour as an incredible achievement, it did not mean much to him. He had nearly died, and that experience made it clear that hunting Tier 2 monsters and even weaker Tier 3 ones would no longer get him far. He needed to focus on creatures at or above his level. Maybe I should give that project a try. Having those armors just sit in spatial storage feels like a waste. Roland walked toward his armory, where his 4 elemental armors rested after being retrieved from storage. The onyx armor had been used heavily in the recent battle and needed to be reforged. Restoring it multiple times had corroded the runes, and now it could only output about 40% of its original power. Several floating golems carried the damaged pieces by using their own mage hand spell and flotation magic. He did not plan to work on them immediately. Instead, he turned his attention to something else. A thinner-looking golem entered the room along with the floating ones. It should be the right size. Bernier did a good job with the parts. From the pile of mangled armor on the table, he picked up one of the larger pauldrons. He walked over to the thin golem and placed it on its shoulder. To his satisfaction, the pauldron did not fall but fit as if it had been made for his own body. Good. This might work. But first, he removed the pauldron and set it back on the table. Then he looked toward the teleportation chamber and sighed. He knew he needed to go to the institute to deal with Anzanus. The man was probably already there waiting, and Roland did not want to keep him waiting any longer. I should eat something before going. After finishing his plans, he left his underground workshop and returned home. He wasn't sure how much free time he would have after today, so he intended to enjoy it while he still could. Ah, Deputy Professor Wayland, you're here. Good to see you, Master Anzanus. I hope you didn't have to wait long. Nonsense, my good fellow. I have quite enjoyed my time here. Oh, and just call me Professor Anzanus. We are among our own. The old white-bearded mage replied warmly to Roland's greeting. His robe was different from before, yet it remained blue and bore the insignia of the magical academy where he taught. To Roland's knowledge, this wizard served on the Academy's Council of Mages, which followed a power structure unlike the one here. The Academy had no Archmagus at Tier 4. Instead, it was governed by a council of high Tier 3 mages, and Anzanus was one of them. I see. Is everything going well at the Sapphire Flame Academy? It's going quite well. The new batch of young fire mages has shown great promise. The future looks bright. Roland nodded. The Sapphire Flame Academy was the institution that both Anzanus and the fourth Valyrian brother had attended. From what Roland knew, Anzanus was not a true knight commander but rather someone whose position had been bought, which made his loyalty less reliable than that of other knights. There was some flexibility in dealing with him and a chance to recruit him in the future if Arthur gained enough prestige. I should get this over with. Although his new acquaintance could prove useful later, at the moment, the old mage was causing him some unease. The two were at Xandar's Institute of Wizardry, where Roland sought access to several flame-related tomes. He had promised to put in a good word for Anzanus with the headmistress, but he was uncertain how she would respond. He had already invoked her name a few times, and while things had not gone badly, he doubted she would continue offering favors without expecting something in return. How peculiar! Is there something hidden from sight? Asked Anzanus as Roland arrived with him near the base of the Mage Tower. To ordinary people it appeared to be nothing more than a tree, and the rest looked like a garden for the students. The fact that this old man could even sense the faint presence of high-level concealment magic said much about his knowledge of the arcane arts. Something like that. How about you wait here? I need to speak with the headmistress first. The Archmagus herself. How wonderful! Would there be a possibility of me coming along? The old man looked like an eager child asking for a favor, but Roland only shook his head. My apologies, but only the deputy professor is permitted inside the Archmagus Tower. Anyone else must be personally invited by the headmistress. I see. In that case, I'll take a stroll through the garden. With those words, he took the usual path while the old man stared in astonishment as the hidden passage revealed itself. This was the home of the headmistress, Yavana Arvandus, known to some as the Lady of Thorns, though to him she only looked like an average elf with greenish skin and mossy hair. When he climbed the stairs again, she was already there at her desk, clearly expecting him and probably aware of the reason for his visit. Deputy Professor Wayland, you're late. Roland stood before Yavana Arvandus's vast wooden desk. Her office, as always, was made of living plant matter. Bark covered the walls, and vines formed the drapes over the windows. The wooden floor creaked faintly under his armored boots as he replied in a quieter tone than usual. Yes, my apologies. There was an incident that delayed me. The Lady of Thorns sat motionless, her long moss-green hair flowing around her shoulders like branches. Her violet eyes scanned a few notes before turning to him with quiet intensity. Ah yes, Dragnus Island. I've heard about it. He was unsure how much she knew or how much she cared for his excuse, but it was true that he had missed a few lectures. According to their previous agreement, he would need to make up for his absence somehow. You've also brought a guest. Azure Flame Anzanus was quite well known a decade ago, and it seems he seeks something from me. Would you care to explain? Roland exhaled slowly. Her voice was calm, yet the sharpness in her tone made it clear she already knew more than she let on. He straightened his posture before speaking. Yes. I met him recently and promised to share some of our knowledge. He is researching flame synthesis for flame magic amplification. During the incident, I sought his assistance and, in return, made that promise without consulting you, headmistress. For that, I apologize. He lowered his head in genuine remorse. It was never wise to lie to a Tier 4 class holder, especially one capable of using magic. If she wished to extract the truth from him, she certainly could. By our knowledge, do you mean from my private library? Yes. In reality, Roland had several options for how to handle the situation. According to their previous arrangement, he was permitted to study the books in the library, though he was not allowed to remove them. He could, however, read them freely and apply what he learned in his own research. Thanks to his excellent memory, he could easily reproduce the contents later, which would allow him to keep his promise to the old mage. The main problem with this approach was the lack of consent from the owner of that knowledge. It was one thing to use what he had learned for his own benefit or for the institute, but quite another to share it with a mage from a rival school. The magical academies often viewed each other as competitors, and assisting an outsider without permission from the intimidating archmage could cause serious trouble. Roland did not know what kind of relationships she maintained with other mages, so he decided it was best to proceed with caution. At least you are honest, but this was not part of our agreement, and you have failed to uphold your end of the contract. There is no real reason for me to accept this. Roland's heart sank as he listened, but he did not interrupt. He knew he was in no position to argue. Only after she finished speaking would he present his case, as he had prepared a few things in advance that might calm her anger. One of them was additional information about the incident. Did I misjudge you? You do not seem like the type who would flaunt your position before others, but considering what happened, perhaps you did not have any choice, Deputy Professor. Her violet eyes glowed faintly as she leaned back in her chair, deep in thought. Initially, it appeared he would face punishment, possibly required to stay and deliver extra lectures or accompany students on road trips. However, the headmistress suddenly nodded, as if reaching a decision, and spoke again in a more relaxed tone. How about this? I will forget that this ever happened, and you may even give your new colleague a book on the highest flame arts from my collection. I will overlook all those missed lectures, and you will be free to come and go as you please. Roland's eyes narrowed behind his visor. The offer seemed too good to be true. The lectures were not unbearable, yet they demanded time, and teleporting from one place to another consumed considerable magical resources. He could not understand why she would allow him to alter the contract after he had already failed to meet its terms. This was unlikely to be a reward and more likely a punishment disguised as generosity. What do you mean by that, headmistress? At this point, Yavana smiled slightly, which made Roland even more nervous. He hadn't known her for long, but he could already tell she was about to say something he wouldn't completely agree with. What I mean, dear Deputy Professor, is that every boon carries its burden. You will receive permission to copy one of the restricted texts from my private library, Flames of the Young Star, but in exchange, I will require something of you. Roland did not move, though his instincts told him that this was the moment to be cautious. The wooden floor beneath him shifted slightly as he leaned on his right leg. I am listening. Yavana folded her hands together, resting her chin atop them. The Quinquennial Arcane Institute convocation is not far off. I would like you to participate in it. Quinquennial Arcane Institute convocation. Yes, I'm sure you know of it. Yes, I do, headmistress. It's a gathering between all the mage schools in the kingdom held every 5 years, but what do you wish me to do there? Roland was aware of this gathering of mages. If he had to compare it to something from his past life, it would be similar to the Olympics, involving not only the mage schools but also the knight academies. It was a large-scale event with various contests between schools and their affiliates. It took place every 5 years, and the winners received trophies and valuable resources as rewards. There were many types of competitions. Some were races through magically shifting mazes, where participants had to reach a goal as quickly as possible. Others were magical battles between individual mages or teams of up to 3. There were also sport-like events, some resembling those from his old world, such as precision spell shooting and long-distance racing. The difference was that the mages did not run themselves, instead, their magical mounts did. It was a massive event that lasted more than a week, and it seemed she wanted him to take part in one of the contests. Oh great! For Roland, who still clung to a faint hope of hiding his identity, this was one of the worst possible outcomes. He would be forced to appear before other mages and the nobles who accompanied them. The competition was very popular throughout the kingdom and was held in different locations depending on the type of event. However, if participating meant he would be excused from giving lectures, perhaps it was worth considering. But what does she want me to do? Take part in the mage battle gauntlet? Maybe the airship race? He was unsure what she meant, as there were so many competitions he could enter. There were no age restrictions, and schools could even bring in outsiders to compete under their name. The entire event had originally been designed to unite the mage schools, but over time it had become a way for them to rank each other. From what he knew, the institute was somewhere in the middle, not particularly strong but not weak either. The institute will participate in all major events this year. However, the one I am most concerned about is the golem battle. You are in the runic department, are you not? That makes you the ideal candidate. Roland blinked. The golem battle event, headmistress. Indeed. She smiled faintly as she placed her hands on the desk and rose to her feet. It is one of the central spectacles of the convocation. The vine curtains drew back from one of the windows as she looked outside. There, mages pit their creations against one another. Constructs of mana, steel, or even flesh. It is both art and war, and this time I intend for our institute to claim the title. He sighed inwardly, knowing there was more to come. You will also assist the faculty with the support items and the implementation of runic enchantments. In previous convocations, our institute always lagged behind others because we relied on mass-produced equipment. With your expertise, that will change. I am certain Professor Arian will offer his assistance. The runic department has been growing, and this is the perfect opportunity to prove its worth. You may refuse and make up for lost time with additional lectures. However, if you agree, I will annul our previous contract, and you will be free to come and go as you please. The next convocation is in 12 months, which should give you enough time to prepare. Will I be exempt from participating in lectures until the competition begins? I will allow that, but I will expect results. Nothing less than second place in the golem competition and top 3 in the general rankings. You will be given a budget to work with, and once the term is over, we will begin preparations. Top 3. Roland began to think. He did not wish to remain a teacher at this institute since it constantly disrupted his work. 12 months was a long time he could use to strengthen himself, gain experience, and continue building and manufacturing new items. In a way, he was intrigued by the competition. He had heard rumors about it. It was an event where magical golems were created and set against each other in battle. Most were built by dwarven craftsmen or through other forms of magical craftsmanship. There was a level limit for regular golem constructs if they were monsters or summons, but not for those made entirely from raw materials and assembled piece by piece. Such creations were considered items and examined only for their origin and age. The use of ancient relics of power was forbidden, as the contest was meant to test each school's ability to create something of its own. With the school's help, I could try working on that project. Robert could probably use it, and it will validate the technology. He already had something in mind, though he was unsure whether it might cause problems later. Still, if he wanted to reach the top 2 or even the top 3 among the best schools, winning the competition would be his best path forward. His opponents would likely stick to conventional designs, and staying within the usual limits would make victory nearly impossible. There were several directions he could take, but one in particular seemed far easier if he truly intended to win. Modifying a golem's internal programming to adapt during combat was one option, but it would be much simpler to use someone already skilled in fighting as a substitute. That would leave him with the task of developing a large enough golem frame to handle everything. To his knowledge, there were certain size constraints on golems, which made this project quite feasible. In the end, I am still part of this kingdom, so bringing some things forward might benefit both me, Arthur, and everyone else. Roland still hesitated to reveal his inventions, but keeping them secret was becoming increasingly difficult. His rune prosthetics were already starting to draw attention. It was perhaps better to present himself openly and gain the support of prominent nobles. Arthur could no longer protect him, but if people knew that he was backed by Tier 4 class holders such as the headmistress and Duke Alexander, no one would dare to interfere. Could I have some time to think this through? Of course. Once you do, please inform me of your decision within 2 days. Yavin replied, her violet eyes gleaming as if she already knew what he would choose. After that, the preparations must begin, and you will need to assemble a team. The sooner you decide, the more time you will have to shape your project. Roland inclined his head respectfully. Understood, headmistress. Good. You may go, and remember, if you wish to receive the book, you must agree to my request first. As expected, he was left without the book Anzanuz had asked for. Still, the old mage could wait, as Roland was already running calculations in his mind. Of course, headmistress. I will contact you through the usual channels once I have decided. Good. I will await your reply. She sat down and resumed reading as if nothing had happened. Roland was left with a huge decision to make. He tried to recall everything he knew about the mage games and the schools he needed to watch out for. One of those schools is close with the Union. They always win anything involving golemic constructs. They are the ones I need to pay attention to. The others, on the other hand. He bit his lower lip as he sorted through his thoughts. The project would require an enormous amount of work, but it was far more interesting than being forced to give lectures at the academy. This competition might be his only chance to escape his current contract and finally achieve freedom. His steps slowed to a crawl as he continued down the stairs. With each step he took, he weighed his options and gradually began to make up his mind about the situation. Oh, good day, Deputy Professor. How may I help you today? Where can I find books, notes, and records about the Quinquennial Arcane Institute convocation? The name was a mouthful, and as soon as he said it, the person at the desk simply nodded. Roland waited for a moment, and after a short pause, the librarian cast a guiding spell that created a small orb of light to lead him there. Before he could leave, however, he was stopped by a blue-robed mage. Professor Wayland, what about my request? Isn't this the regular library? Anzanuz gestured toward the other teachers and even students wandering about, something that should have been impossible with knowledge reserved for the Archmagus headmistress. How about you first look through the regular library? You might still find something worth researching here. The old man stroked his beard and, after a moment, seemed to reach an epiphany. I see. So the true research is locked away and not easily accessed. I knew something like this would happen. Anzanuz clearly misunderstood the situation, but Roland had no intention of correcting him. For now, he needed to keep the old man distracted before he reached any conclusions. He could still provide what Anzanuz wanted even after refusing the headmistress, but it would take more time. At the moment, Roland only wanted to study the Quinquennial Arcane Institute convocation to plan his next move. If he could not meet the threshold the headmistress required, there would be no reason to accept her offer. Yet if his chances of success were high, participating in the large-scale event might prove worthwhile. He had remained hidden in Albrook for quite some time. Rumors of his work were already spreading throughout the kingdom, and though he tried to stop them, it was impossible. Perhaps it was better to look ahead now. Presenting his achievements and observing what the other mage schools could offer might not be such a bad idea after all. It was likely that the proverbial ball had already begun to roll. The Duke, the entire Valyrian household, and the nobles under their influence were now aware of him. Danger surrounded him, and hiding was potentially no longer an option. Perhaps showing a bit more confidence would serve him better, as new opportunities could emerge from boldness. Chances will come naturally to the victor. Gaining favor with the mage schools and exchanging theories with other crafters could prove valuable in the future. Although his progress was impressive for his age, he knew that without the Institute and without the help of the Dwarven Union or Rastix's expertise in alchemy, he would never have reached this point. He could still conceal his face and true identity as he always had. Testing his inventions against the finest minds in the kingdom would reveal how far he had truly come in the world of craftsmen. I'll leave you to your research, Professor Anzanuz. If we lose sight of each other, you can probably find me at the runic department. If not, just ask Professor Arian to send a message. Anzanuz smiled faintly, but it seemed that he wasn't truly buying Roland's story. Of course, of course. The runic department. Just use your temporary badge. With it, you will be able to access all the facilities at the Institute that any other professor can, with a few exceptions, of course. Roland gave a polite nod, though inwardly he sighed. The old mage was far too inquisitive for his liking. Still, for now, he needed the man to be patient. He was soon guided to an area filled with books, notes, and even schematics of past creations from previous competitions, and there was a great deal of it. The ones about the golem competition are here. He focused his research on the main event, the one the headmistress wanted him to design a golem for. As he expected, this institute, which lacked expertise in magical crafts, had never been victorious and usually ended up near the bottom of the rankings. Their best result in the last century had been a modest 4th place. How many schools are going to participate? For a moment, Roland stopped thinking about the competition itself and instead focused on who he would be up against. The most likely to win the golem event was a school near Mount Veron, an area known for its dwarven craftsmen and runesmiths. The mages there had a symbiotic relationship with the dwarves and specialized in earth magic. The school's name was the Iron Spire Collegium, built into the mountains with its own A+ rank dungeon for hunting monsters and gathering materials. It was one of the more prestigious schools in the kingdom, known for its mastery of a single element, though there were many others as well. Even though most of the schools have no archmages, Yavana's presence doesn't really help with these things. There were many smaller mage schools in the kingdom and 6 main ones. The one he was teaching at was one of them, Master Enzanuz came from another, and the third was the Iron Spire Collegium. There were 3 more, with one that had remained at the very top for the last 100 years. The Starbloom Elemental Academy has won almost all of these competitions. They are usually first or second at worst. This academy was led by another Archmagus, one who followed the path of an elementalist. It was located in the central part of the kingdom, within the capital city. The school was closely tied to the royal family, and the Archmagus there also served as the court mage. He held significant political influence and had a unique position, answering only to the king and advising on matters of magic. At least that's what the rumors say. People claim he is more powerful than Yavana, but Tier 4 class holders rarely fight each other anyway, so no one can really confirm it. Battles between individuals of such high class were extremely rare. Their power was usually reserved for wars between kingdoms or empires. They served as the ultimate weapons, waiting to be unleashed if ever necessary. Their mere existence was often enough to deter other nations from invading. Now then. Roland began flipping through the many tomes and notes laid out before him. He learned about the various competitions, how some lesser-known schools had managed to win a few, and what kinds of support items could help this institute achieve victory. It quickly became clear why one school kept winning the golemic competitions. Few schools dedicated much effort to that field, as most focused on events that showcased speed in spellcasting, precision, or combat against summoned creatures. It's obvious why the institute hasn't won much. When he closed the last book, he finally understood why the headmistress had given him this task. Compared to the other schools, this institute lagged behind in one specific area, enchantments, the very field he specialized in. It's possible, 12 months isn't too bad. I might even have time to finish my other projects, and the school will provide me with the materials for free. The more he thought about it, the more he planned, and the clearer his decision became. In truth, only one thing held him back from joining. Once he revealed his abilities, his reputation would grow. Yet at this point, was there any reason to keep hiding? Perhaps showing his talent to the kingdom would earn him protection. His enemies were only beginning to study him, so now was the perfect time to make his presence known. This is going to be troublesome, and how big will this budget even be? At that very moment, he made up his mind. Roland closed the last book and placed it on the table. The sound it made was softened by the silence enchantments covering the library. Once finished, he added a bit of mana, and the books began to float back to their shelves, drawn to their proper places. I guess I'll do it. The words were quiet, spoken more to himself than to anyone else, yet as soon as they left his lips, the air around him seemed to shift. He was no longer wondering whether he should accept the offer. Instead, his mind was already planning several steps ahead. The participants for the games had not yet been selected, but he could still obtain a list of the top students. Some competitions have age restrictions, if I remember correctly. It won't be only upperclassmen and teachers taking part. There would be a great deal of research required, but he could delegate most of it to Arian or some of the other assistant professors in the runic department. His task would be to bring out the best in the chosen participants with custom-made enchanted gear and to prepare the golem for the competition. With that decision made, he turned toward the headmistress's tower. By the time he left the archives, the sun was already setting behind the institute's buildings. Crimson light stretched across the courtyard, and fortunately, the old man in the blue robe was nowhere to be seen. He was probably still somewhere inside the archives. There was little more Roland could learn here, but going through all those books would take time. Ah, Deputy Professor, you're back already. Have you made up your mind? Roland found himself once again in the headmistress's office. She looked as though she had known what his answer would be all along, and he couldn't help but wonder if he had been playing into her hands from the very beginning. Still, the proposition was not without merit. Before he could fully commit, however, there were a few questions he needed answered. It was one thing if the institute covered all expenses, but quite another if he had to rely on his own research funds to secure a victory. Yes, but first, could you tell me how much money the Institute plans to invest in this golem? Investing? Ah, right. I forgot that people like you tend to worry about such things. Will this be enough? Yavana's lips curved into an all-knowing smile. She extended one hand, and her long nails gleamed faintly in the lamplight. For a moment, Roland assumed she meant to summon a contract or perhaps a set of ledgers to show the monetary limit he would be given. Instead, the wood beneath his feet began to groan. The planks slowly parted to reveal something hidden. At once, he felt the pull of spatial magic, and a concealed area opened before him. Within the gap that had formed in the floor lay rows upon rows of sparkling treasure. Gold, silver, and platinum glittered among piles of coins from many different kingdoms. It was the largest treasure hoard he had ever seen, and he thought that if this woman lived in modern times, she would easily be a billionaire. Those metals, Orialcum, and so much mithril, but what are those? I don't recognize that mana signature. There were countless metals in the chamber, some still in raw ore form, pulsing faintly with magic. The space stretched far beyond what he could fully see, yet one thing was clear. This archmagus was wealthier than most of the high nobility. He did not know where she had gathered such riches, but it was evident that money had never been her concern. As you can see, Deputy Professor, Yavana said, her tone almost playful. Resources are not an obstacle. What matters are results. I can provide gold, mithril, orichalcum, even arcanite, but without a skilled craftsman with true vision, none of it will matter. Roland stood in silence, gazing into the abyss of wealth beneath the tower. The sheer density of mana was overwhelming. After a short moment, the display ended as the floorboards began to close, sealing away the treasure once more. Now he understood why there was always such commotion whenever one of these archmages died. They left behind treasures beyond measure, riches that could change the fate of kingdoms. Any other questions? He was left somewhat dumbfounded after the spectacle. With this amount of wealth, he could probably fund his next golem project without any trouble. This would leave most of Albrook's diminishing funds available for the subway project and the fight against Theodore's economic attacks. Will it be fine if I do most of my work at my own workshop? That's fine. If you wish, you may ask for help from anyone in the runic department, but try not to overburden them. Everyone still has their own work to do. I see, then I suppose. Could I have an explanation of my full responsibilities? I've done some preliminary research, but I'm sure there is more to it. The headmistress nodded and began explaining what she expected from Roland. It took about an hour for her to finish the description, and it was roughly what he had anticipated. He would be responsible for creating many support items such as enchanted bracelets, pendants, armor, and even magical staves. The participants would be chosen 6 months before the events, giving him enough time to prepare everything. This arrangement would free up a great deal of time for him, as he would no longer be required to give lectures. Instead, he could focus entirely on his research, something he had already been planning to do. While the large-scale event was not the testing ground he had hoped for, it was still a perfect opportunity to measure his creations against the best the kingdom had to offer. He could finally see how his skills compared to other Tier 3 runesmiths and enchanters. I will be expecting a lot from you, Deputy Professor Wayland. Roland nodded and excused himself from the headmistress's office once he had received all the necessary information. There was one contract to sign to secure his position, but it carried no serious consequences if broken. It seemed that the Archmagus trusted him completely, and he could not understand where such faith came from. Ever since his arrival, she had been favoring him, though he had no idea why. Well, at least I got this. This should keep Anzanuz off my back. In his right hand, he held a tome on Tier 4 fire magic. As soon as he stepped outside the tower, his so-called friend appeared. He had taken only a few steps when the blue-robed mage materialized in front of him. Professor Wayland, there you are. Yes, here I am. Oh, that tome you're holding, could it be? Anzanuz caught on quickly. His mana perception was probably stronger than Roland's, as he immediately sensed the flame mana swirling around the book. Indeed. As you know, you may not remove this book from the Institute. The headmistress has granted permission for you to study it for 3 days, but it must be returned afterward. Oh, of course. I would never dare to anger the Archmagus. The old man's fingers trembled as Roland handed him the book. It was a funny sight. Anzanuz looked like a child who had finally received a toy he had wanted for years. His eyes sparkled with delight, and he struggled to keep himself from opening the book right then and there. Follow this summoned creature to your accommodations. It will be your guide through the institute while I am gone. I probably will not be returning for some time, so we may not see each other again for a while." Once Roland uttered these words, the old mage seemed to awaken from a trance. "Ah, I hope our paths cross again in the future." "They probably will, but for now I will bid you farewell, Professor Anzanus." Both of them understood that mages were always occupied with research, spellcraft, and mana training. Anzanus bowed slightly, his blue robe fluttering as a soft gust of mana passed through the park. The summoned creature, which resembled a small plant fairy, flew ahead, guiding the old mage toward his temporary quarters. The little being acted not only as a guide but also as a chaperone, and it would alert the headmistress if the old man ever attempted to carry the tome outside. "Now then, I should go to Arian and discuss a few matters with him." With nearly everything settled, Roland made his way to the runic department to inform Arian of the news. He would not be attending future lectures and would likely return only to request additional funds or in 6 months when the competition participants were chosen. "Oh, Professor Wayland, I've heard the great news." "You did?" "Indeed." The department had expanded since his first visit to the institute, and even at this hour, it was filled with activity. It appeared that the headmistress had already told Arian about the plans for the upcoming event. "Good, then I won't need to explain anything to you." The two spoke for a while, discussing possible runic devices for the students and identifying the best potential recruits for the competition. To Roland's surprise, Arian had already prepared several scrolls listing the school's top students, clearly compiled even before Roland had agreed to the headmistress's proposal. "So she expected me to agree from the start." He sighed softly and left the runic department, heading toward the teleportation gates. Out of idle curiosity, he opened one of the scrolls and skimmed through the names, grades, and ages of the students. Just as he reached the gate chamber, he stopped in his tracks. His eyes lingered on one particular name, a student he recognized. "Oh, Professor Wayland, I thought you went home. Have you had a change of heart? Will you join me in tomorrow's lecture?" Arian floated around with a smile on his cat-like face as he saw his favorite partner walking down the hall and back into the runic department. Roland, however, was moving quickly as if in a hurry. His steps were fast, and each time his metallic boots struck the polished floor, they made a sharp clanking sound. "No, that's not it. Could you look at this list, particularly this student?" "The event list? Is there an issue?" The cat was confused by the request but chose not to ask questions. Instead, he looked at the part of the parchment Roland was pointing to. There were several student names written there, but Arian could not see what the problem was. "This event is for the younger students. Is there something wrong with their registration?" Arian tilted his feline head to the side, his tail flicking once in curiosity. Roland did not answer immediately. He stared at the parchment as if the inked letters were mocking him. His eyes lingered on one name written neatly among the rest, Lucienne Arden. It had been some time since he had seen his younger sister. Their father had taken her away from the institute, mostly because of her involvement with Viola Castellane. Viola had bullied his sister until Roland put an end to it, but there were still many people at the school who could make life difficult for her. He assumed their father, Wentworth, decided to keep her away to prevent more conflict between the families. Why did he decide to bring her back, and did the headmistress know about it? Roland wondered as he looked at the parchment. Arian seemed unaware of the situation, but the headmistress had known about the Robert incident and likely knew more than she admitted. He began to suspect he had been deceived. "Did she do this to keep me here?" His relationship with his sister had not been long, but he had always felt a need to protect her. Perhaps the headmistress understood this. Even if she allowed him to avoid teaching, she must have known that as long as Lucienne was at the institute, he would stay to watch over her. He wondered if the shrewd Magus had arranged things so that his participation in the coming competition would not free him from his duties here. "She got me," he whispered to himself, having convinced his mind that this was true. Although it was not the worst possible outcome, he still had to worry about his sister becoming involved with the other students. Perhaps their father believed that his new position as marshal would keep people away, but Roland was not so sure about that. "Oh? What was that?" "Nothing." Roland sighed and took back the parchment. "Professor Arian, could you do me a favor?" "Of course, my friend." "What is it?" "Could you look into this student's situation? If I remember correctly, she was taken away from the institute by her parents." Arian raised one of his paws and nodded. I will ask one of the assistant professors to look into it. It is wonderful to have more help around here, and I owe it all to you. Yes, more help. While Arian was quite giddy about the whole situation, Roland felt betrayed. If he had known his sister was returning, he might not have taken the deal, since he would have come back anyway to keep an eye on her. I need to make more protective golems. Maybe I should place them around the institute to watch over her when I am not here. His mind was already abuzz with countermeasures for his sister's arrival, yet the situation was not entirely bad. He had been unable to stay in contact with her because he was still hiding from their father. Even though he was a faculty member, it would have seemed suspicious if he maintained contact with his younger sister for no clear reason. However, if she were returning to the institute, that problem no longer existed. I could probably bring her back to Albrook, have her see Robert too, but I can only hope she is not returning too soon. Although his sister's name was on the list, she had not yet entered the institute grounds. Roland knew the rules, and if they were followed, she could only reapply at the start of the next semester. If she passed the required tests, she would be admitted. The headmistress could accelerate the process, but she rarely involved herself in such matters, as doing so would make her intentions too obvious. Roland left the runic department with a heavy expression. The faint rustle of parchment sounded in his hand as he folded the student list. The air outside had cooled, and the sun was sinking behind the horizon. He paused for a moment before glancing at the headmistress's hidden tower. The tower rose above the rest of the institute, though most people were unaware of its existence. After a short pause, he turned and walked toward the teleportation gate chamber. He went through the usual process and waited several minutes for the mage on duty to allow him to pass. Without looking back, he stepped through the gate and vanished from sight. His departure did not go unnoticed, as one person was observing him. I suppose he has realized part of my plan, but not all of it. The headmistress whispered to herself. Within the quiet of her office, she held a cup of green tea in her hands. I wonder what he will present for the event? I bet it will be something surprising. Yavana's gaze lingered on the faint ripples in her tea, the golden surface reflecting the lamplight. The scent of mint and jasmine filled the air as she pondered the situation. A faint smile crept onto her face, showing that she was enjoying herself, something she had believed lost long ago. I hope you will not disappoint me, Roland Arden. For a moment, she focused on the residual distortions in space left by the teleportation gate. Her smile slowly faded as her eyes drifted toward the continental map on the table. Her gaze settled on the northernmost part of the kingdom, and she remained silent as she considered something quietly. Welcome back, boss. Good to see you too, Bernier. We have not had time to talk. Has everything been well? Roland had finally returned to his workshop and now sat before the main display panels. Bernier had been waiting to greet him, and his cheerful expression showed that he was in good spirits. Things are going well here. Production has been up, and people have begun asking questions about our prosthetics. I feel that it is about to happen. Bernier raised his prosthetic hand and clenched it tightly. His fingers reacted instantly, showing that he had fully adapted to the latest modifications. Mana flowed smoothly through the runes, and they pulsed gently across the metallic framework. Have you tried the sleeve? Yes, but it chafes a bit after a while and does not feel right. Roland nodded. The prosthesis came with a glove and a sleeve to cover the pulsating runes that some people preferred not to see. In the future, he hoped these prosthetics would look more human. There were various substances in this world that resembled silicon or rubber, and with the right one, he hoped to mimic the look of skin to cover these limbs. This technology would certainly be sought after, and if the prosthetics were to replace true limbs, they would need to look like them. How about the other models and the add-ons? Those work well, though some are harder to handle. It is mostly about the weight, it takes some time to get used to it, but there are benefits. I can even hold searing blades and bolts without a problem. It makes some techniques much easier to use. Bernier rubbed his beard with his metallic hand. Roland noticed that the fingers were a bit discolored from touching hot metal. For a craftsman like Bernier, who did not possess a proper combat class with a stat multiplier, handling certain materials was more difficult. Roland could touch such materials with his bare hands, but the prosthetic made this process much easier. There were other ways to use this technology without cutting off human limbs. One approach involved exoskeletal limbs that responded to mana phantoms, while another used golems that could mimic human movement. There was also the possibility of developing remote control systems, but this was a field he had not yet found the time to explore. So, what are we doing next, boss? Bernier's eyes sparkled, as it had been some time since they had worked on something creative. There are a few things we will focus on in the future, but before that, should you not take care of yourself first? Hey, what do you mean, boss? I mean your level. You are ready to become tier 3. Ah, that. Bernier had been crafting a great deal of high-level equipment lately. Craftsmen gained a large amount of experience when they successfully worked on advanced gear. His assistant was skilled and capable, and he had finally reached the threshold, yet for some reason, he had not taken the next step. Name: Bernier L150. Classes: T2 Weaponsmith L50. T2 Armorsmith L50. T1 Carpenter L25. T1 Blacksmith L25. Regretfully, Roland could not make Bernier one of his vassals. Just as with his wife, the skill did not work on anyone who lacked a combat class. Bernier also could not take a similar vow to the one Robert had made, which granted him a runic skill, because he was not a knight. The world was harsh toward people with manufacturing or management type classes. However, to Roland's surprise, something did happen, and Bernier was quick to bring it up. Well, actually, I've gained this strange title lately. You did? Can I? Go ahead, boss. Roland was capable of reading people's levels, attributes, and even their skills and titles if he focused on them long enough. He usually avoided doing so since it felt like an invasion of privacy, so he made sure to ask permission whenever he used this ability on someone he knew. Soul touched. Title: a person with this title has become attuned to their soul. That's kind of vague. Does it do anything? Roland read the short description, but it did not reveal much. Bernier only shrugged since he was not sure either. I don't know. I don't feel any different, and I don't think I've been seeing any ghosts either. Bernier laughed out loud, but then paused as he remembered something. I did have a few strange dreams lately though. Strange dreams? Like what? I felt like I was floating out of my body and could see myself sleeping, but it didn't last long. Roland thought about it for a moment. Titles were never given without reason, so there had to be some cause behind it. Could it be due to the prosthetic limb? That seemed like the most likely explanation. The mana phantoms appeared to be made of mana, but in truth, they were extensions of a person's soul or true self. Perhaps using prosthetic limbs that required synchronization with the phantom had triggered this title. Still, he was not sure whether it offered any real benefit, since it was only a title and not an actual skill that could be used. I wonder if it will affect your ascension ritual. We should probably go ahead with it while I'm still here, Roland said as he stood up from his seat. The room Arthur had been using to record memories was now free, so it was a good time to help Bernier take the next step. Bernier's wife had already advanced and become a master armorsmith, which left him behind. I suppose I should get this over with, but don't expect too much, boss. You know how it is. Bernier looked down at his artificial arm and frowned slightly. Both of them knew that lost limbs would not be restored through the ascension ritual, which meant he would have to face it with only one arm. With such a disadvantage, it was possible that he would have to settle for a lesser class, perhaps an advanced armorsmith or a high blacksmith, which were not nearly as prestigious. Let's take it slow first. Look at the options you have, but I'm more interested in your new title. It might offer a new solution. I hope it does. Bernier chuckled, and the two made their way to the White Room. Once Bernier was ready, he activated the Ascension Crystal, just like the others before him. Roland watched the consoles and noticed immediately that his friend had not abandoned the trial. Instead, he had chosen an option inside, as the time he was spending there was longer than usual. Did he find something worthwhile? Roland wondered as he monitored the readings, curious how being attuned to a soul might affect a class. He remembered a witch spiritualist who could control phantoms and disabled him instantly without lifting her crooked finger. Yet she had been a mage, and Bernier was a blacksmith with little mana. Even if he managed to use spiritual magic, he would likely pass out after casting a single spell, so he wasn't sure what the title was good for. Haven't been here in a while. Bernier opened his eyes and found himself standing in what looked like a village square. The air was heavy, still, and strangely familiar. He blinked and rubbed his eyes. Before him stretched a mist-shrouded settlement nestled between two cliffs. The smell of whetstone and forge smoke lingered in the air, a scent he remembered well. Just as gloomy as I remember it. This was his ascension trial space and his old home, where he had grown up. He took a few slow steps forward, his boots crunching against the cobblestone path. Everything was as he remembered it, the rough stone dwellings carved into the mountainside, the central forge darkening the sky with its smoke, and the half-finished statue of the dwarven god of crafting. Only now, there were no people. No ringing hammers, no laughter, no shouts of miners returning with ore. Just silence. I wonder what those old bastards would say if they saw me now. He glanced at his arm where his runic prosthetic should have been, but it was gone, replaced by a stump. Just as he expected, bringing it into the trial was impossible. They'd probably still laugh at me. What's a blacksmith without his dominant smithing arm? His life in the village had never been easy, as the dwarven craftsmen resented him for having a human parent. In the end, he was forced to leave after his father died in an accident and his mother was killed by a monster attack, leaving him orphaned. Without his father's help, finding work became impossible, and some of the surviving residents even blamed him for their misfortunes. The memories of those old days still haunted him from time to time, but he had managed to bury them beneath years of hammering and laughter shared with Roland, his wife, and the arrival of his child. Still, standing here now in this echo of his childhood, those memories returned. The forge loomed ahead, its cold chimney rising into the grey fog. Bernier could almost hear the sound of molten metal being poured and the hiss of quenched steel. He half expected to hear his father's gruff voice calling his name, telling him to fetch more ore and hold the tongs tighter. I should probably see what my options are. The boss will help me get through this. He clenched his only fist and moved forward. Although the mountain was tall, there was no leaving this village. The mist surrounding it would not let him through, and whenever he tried, he always ended up back in the middle of the square. As with other ascension trials, this one presented its challenges in a unique way. For him, it took the form of his old home and the dusty forge his father had used. His parents had been strict but kind. Each time he came here to gain a new class, he remembered both the good and the bad days they had shared. Let's see, the hammer collection is larger than usual, and some of them look quite nice. Inside his father's forge stood an anvil in the center and many differently shaped smithing hammers on a nearby workbench. The trial would begin once he chose one of the hammers and struck the anvil with it. Wait, what is this one, and why does it look like that? While most of the hammers were made of various grades of metal, one stood apart. It was different and unique, and he found that he could not take his eyes off it.